CD4.
He is more than pleased with the choice, later writing, "No consideration should be set in competitions with that of her being of a construction of the safest kind, in which the officers may, with the least hazard, venture upon a strange coast. These properties are not to be found in ships of war of 40 guns, nor in frigates, nor in East India Company's ships, nor in large 3-decked West India ships, as such are built for the coal trade, which are peculiarly adapted for this purpose." And oh, what a pleasure it is, as this man from such humble beginnings strides around his maritime equivalent of home and hearth, a Whitby cat. Here is the capstan, and there is the wheel, with the binnacle containing the compasses, and when you take 3 steps to your left, of course, here's the ship's bell, while there by the stairs leading to the quarter-deck is the copper bowl known as the piss-dale, where officers could relieve themselves. All of them, Cook insists, even the piss-dale, must be polished till they shine, ship-shape, as brightly as the brass buckles and buttons on the uniforms of the officers. With no little pride, Captain Cook watches as a young tar, not so long ago he used to be one of those, he muses, hauls on the rope to haul to the top of the masthead the Endeavour's officially commissioned pennant, a cross of St. George in the hoist and a white fly, dancing on the summer breeze. But to work. No sooner is Cook aboard than he begins the task of fitting out his ship, ensuring that everything is done just so. From long and sometimes bitter experience, Cook knows that proper preparation can now make all the difference to the success of the entire expedition, and will very likely be the difference between life and death for many of the ship's company. Just a quick glance tells him that all 5 anchors are in perfect nick, which is to the good, while of the ship's 3 main boats, the longboat, pinnace, and yawl, the longboat is not. The past command of this ship has allowed a simple coat of varnish to cover the wood that has been eaten by worms and turned rotten. With a few sharp commands, Cook has the shipwrights from the yard start to strip it back, replace the wood, and have it painted with white lead, which should do the trick to protect it in the tropics. These ship boats are important for carrying out the myriad ferrying operations Cook and his men will need to go from ship to shore, and will also be crucial to acting as lifeboats should the Endeavour ever founder. It is unthinkable they not begin the voyage in pristine shape. From first light until that part of the dusk which no longer argues the toss with night as to who holds sway, and sometimes beyond, courtesy of lanterns, the sound of hammering, sawing, and cursing comes from the Endeavour. Yes, it had been perfect for carrying coal, but to carry some 90 people with their attendant luggage and accoutrements, a 3rd deck must be built into the hold, replete with cabins for the ship's warrant officers and midshipmen, as well as a powder magazine for the cannon it will carry, and many extra storerooms for the victuals that must last them as long as 18 months. Now, in terms of protecting the hull, Captain Cook does not wish it to be copper-sheathed, as the Admiralty has ordered. A covering of copper had been used as an experiment on the Dolphin, but to Cook's mind had proved too easily damaged, impossible to repair far from home without a dry dock, and there had been issues of chemical reaction between the copper and the iron bolts in the hull, as the copper caused the iron to corrode, making the ship nail-sick. No, he insists, her hull must be protected with an extra layer of thin oak, planking over tarred felt, corked with oakum, basically tarred fibre, produced by the painstaking unpicking of old tarred ropes, a task mainly undertaken by hapless prisoners lodged at prisons up and down the country, all of it to protect the precious hull from the borer worm known to plague ships in the tropics. As to where specifically in the South Pacific the transit should be observed, Captain Wallace of the Dolphin has handed the Royal Society their answer on a silver platter, and right in time. An island paradise, perfectly positioned for their purposes. It is one that sounds so exotic that my lords of the Admiralty can barely believe that the accounts they hear are true. The least of it is the formal geographical description. "We have discovered a large, fertile, and extremely populous island in the South Seas. The Dolphin came to anchor in a safe, spacious, and commodious harbour. Yes, this Otaheite, expressed in the English tongue as Tahiti, is apparently like nothing ever discovered before, with the inhabitants extending extraordinary hospitality to their British visitors, and no more welcoming gestures more gratefully received than those extended by Tahiti's voluptuous brown-skinned women, who are so free with their sexual favours, some of the sailors are reportedly worn out. Generally, the Europeans are as much wonder to the Tahitians as the Tahitians are to them. From the behaviour of the inhabitants, we had reason to believe she was the first and only ship they had ever seen. What better place than this? A stable speck in the South Pacific, unclaimed by any other nation, with water, food, helpful men, and beautiful women on call, to base the Endeavour for the transit. Already the Dolphin's master's mate, who sailed with both foul-weather Jack Byron and Wallace, he is one of the few men in known history to have circumnavigated the globe twice, the 38-year-old American-born mariner John Gore has joined and wants to get underway, and the sooner the better. No, really, can we get underway tomorrow? And despite Captain Wallace swearing his men to secrecy about their discovery, already a shanty is doing the rounds of the inns and taverns dotted nearby the docks. Ye bold British tars who to glory are free, who dare venture your lives for your fortunes at sea, yourself for a while of your pleasures disrobe, and attend to a tale of a voyage round the globe. For the Dolphin's returned, and such tidings does bring, as may welcome us home to our country and king. Then we ploughed the South Ocean, such land to discover, as amongst other nations has made such a pother. We found it, my boys, and with joy be it told, for beauty such islands you ne'er did behold. We've the pleasure ourselves the tidings to bring, as may welcome us home to our country and king. For wood, water, fruit, and provision well stored, such an isle as King George's the world can't afford. For to each of these islands great Wallace gave name, which will e'er be recorded in the annals of fame. We had the fortune to find them, and homeward to bring the tidings a tribute to country and king. But can this magic land of Tahiti actually be real? Some at the Admiralty remain incredulous, and with good reason. Foul-weather Jack's raconteur midshipman Charlie Clerk had come back to tell wild but believable stories of how they had encountered a race of giants in Patagonia, a people no less than 9 feet high. Actually, once Charlie had thought about it, and the story had taken off in the English press, he had decided over a bottle with friends that they were 11 feet high, and the story had gained such legs it had been recorded in the Royal Society's journal Philosophical Transactions, complete with illustrations. One can only hope the editor remained philosophical when he learnt that he was having his leg pulled by a master of the art. But yes, serious inquiries with Captain Wallace established that Tahiti is real, ideal for the Society's purposes, and so Tahiti it is. All up, it means that Lieutenant Cook is going to have little trouble filling out his crew roster. One of the first appointments is none other than Commodore Foul-weather Jack's tall-tale-telling midshipman Charlie Clerk, who joins as one of 2 master's mates. There are 6 more sailors who had been on the Dolphin with Wallace and who have only been back in England a few weeks and are now eager to return. There is the American-born John Gore, who had sailed with Foul-weather Jack and Wallace, who soon receives his first King's Commission to join the Endeavour as 3rd Lieutenant. Yes, Gore is from the American colonies, and a notably charismatic, impetuous, and independent kind of man to boot. But there are quite a few from New York, Virginia, and the like, serving with the British at this time. There is Dick Pickersgill, a 19-year-old Yorkshireman, who is too fond of grog, like most sailors, but when sober has such a talent for surveying and chart-making that he knows precisely where he left his heart, back in Tahiti. He cannot sign up quickly enough, and is appointed as the other master's mate in spite of his youth. Nor can Robert Molyneux wait to get back to Aphrodite's Isle. Also a heavy drinker, but 3 years older than Pickersgill, he is appointed as no less than the ship's master, Captain Cook's usual role. while young Frank Wilkinson, a Welshman, and James Gray are soon on the muster roll as able seamen. James Margra, a 22-year-old fellow from the backwoods of the American colonies who has been at sea since the age of 15 and fought in the 7 Years' War, a smooth man when sober, rare as that condition might be, is also signed on as a midshipman. All of them are impatient to get started, to get back to Tahiti. On a personal note, there are 2 young fellows that Cook is also quick to sign up. The first is his young servant from his last season on the Grenville, a 16-year-old London lad by the name of William Howson, who will fill the same role on the Endeavour. And at the behest of his dear wife Elizabeth, Cook also signs up her cousin, 16-year-old Isaac Smith, who had also proved his worth aboard the Grenville as a sailor and amateur surveyor, and is, besides, the epitome of a likely lad, a fellow well liked by crew and officers alike. The positions of the officers are quickly filled, with Cook the commander, captain and first lieutenant. One Zachary Hicks is chosen as second lieutenant, Cook's second in command. Hicks is a 29-year-old of great experience, and Cook has liked the cut of his jib from the first. Come mid-July, Captain Cook has a full muster of 70 sailors, all of whom, once hired, must provide their own uniform, together with a bowl, a spoon, and a mug. His Majesty's Royal Navy will provide them with a sea chest so they may tightly and tidily stow their gear. Most of the sailors sport ponytails, that distinctive ribbon of hair that tells the tale that these are seafaring men, not dandies. There are the ship's 3 standing warrant officers. They don't hold a commission from the Crown, but they do have a warrant from the Navy Board. The carpenter John Satterley, the gunner Stephen Forward, and the boatswain John Gathray, as do the armourers, who are responsible for keeping all muskets and cannon in working order, while dealing with all things metal, and are the most engaged in its actual operation. Though risen from the ranks, the standing warrant officers have not risen that far, for they still mess and dine with the common herd of sailors. As for herds that make a mess, the Endeavour will carry sheep, hogs, and fowl as well as men. Their numbers will decrease as appetites increase, but the boat shall initially be a vessel of menagerie rather than botany. The most important of the warrant officers, from Cook's point of view, is the noted Navy surgeon, William Monkhouse. He's the one over there, the fellow with the rheumy eyes and slightly sagging jowls of a sad hound dog, forever taking a silver snuff-box from his pocket and sniffing a pinch of the tobacco contained within. Cook already knows and respects Surgeon Monkhouse from their years in Newfoundland together. There are some captains for whom the collective care of their sailors is neither here nor there, who accept a number of deaths per voyage as simply something that goes with the territory, but Cook is not one of them. From the beginning, it will be a point of pride with him to keep as many of his men healthy and alive as possible, and with Surgeon Monkhouse on board, he is off to a good start. By happy coincidence, Monkhouse not only knows Joseph Banks, Esquire, well, but as the surgeon on the Niger in Newfoundland, he had been credited with saving Banks's life when the naturalist fell gravely ill with ague and fever. So highly does Captain Cook regard Monkhouse that he also readily agrees to take on the surgeon's younger brother, Jonathan, as a midshipman. The medical man is gratified both for himself and for his brother. For one thing, he personally needs to get away from his life in London, for private reasons he does not care to talk about right now. And, for another thing, his brother Jonathan, though a fine young man, can be of sometimes impetuous disposition, and could do with some watching over. Cook is less pleased and even angered by other appointments. For just one glance at the frail old man the Admiralty has sent him to act as the Endeavour's cook sees the captain dash off a note to the Navy Board complaining that the cook assigned is a lame, infirm man and incapable of doing his duty. For once, the Navy Board reacts relatively quickly, withdrawing the old cook and sending a new one, a John Thompson, who comes down to the yards at Deptford, but cannot take Cook's proffered glove right hand in welcome, for Mr. Thompson doesn't actually have anything more than a blunt stump. Yes, the Admiralty has sent him a one-handed cook to feed nearly 100 men for the next 2 years. Again, Cook dashes off a note of protest, only to see his hopes dashed, for the Admiralty will neither budge nor fudge. Working as a cook is one of the few occupations available to cripples or maimed men, and if captains don't like it, so be it. In any case, Captain Cook's temper is tempered soon enough, when he finds Thompson to be more than competent after all. And, of course, but for the grace of God and a good surgeon all those years ago, the captain himself would have been a one-handed cook. As Cook's people shape up, so does his ship. A set of 28 feet long sweeps, long oars, are brought on board so that if they are becalmed or even demasted, they will still be able to have some propulsion in any direction they choose. No less than 8 tons of ballast, large rocks together with slabs of pig iron, are carried aboard and placed in the bilge to keep the Endeavour stable in heavy seas. Now, against the possibility of their shipping water in such great quantities it might sink them, Cook also insists on 4 of the best possible pumps, known as elm tree pumps, so called because they are made from hollowed-out elm trees. When properly manned with 2 good men and true working the brake handle, the pumps are capable of moving an extraordinary amount of water out of the bilge, 25 gallons a minute, in what usually amounts to 15-minute lots, before the men need to rest and be replaced by fresh men. Ideally, they will never have to face such a situation, for they will not take water, but it is just Cook's way to try to cover every possibility, most particularly worst-case scenarios. These pumps can also be used to pump up seawater, with which to scrub the decks, and also in case of fire. It is a similar insurance against misadventure that Cook oversees the installation of a copper distilling apparatus, capable of making 42 gallons of fresh water from 56 gallons of seawater. It all takes time and care, but Cook has no doubt that it is worth it. And of course he makes sure to have the best navigational instruments, sextant, compass, and Neville Maskelyne's British Mariner's Guide and Nautical Almanac, a rich new resource that charts the skies and will help Cook to calculate longitude. The astronomical tools and equipment given to him by the Royal Society are also safely brought on board, tested once more, and carefully stowed, all under the watchful eye of the captain. But wait, one last thing. Cook requests from Admiralty Secretary Philip Stevens a set of instruments in order to make surveys of such parts as His Majesty's bark the Endeavour, under my command, may touch at. On the list, of course, is a plane table, and all the accoutrements, just the same as he had used for the first time almost 10 years ago, to the day when he met Lieutenant Samuel Holland at Louisbourg. There is also a ship's cat, and a remarkably worldly goat that has already spent 3 years in the West Indies and circumnavigated the globe with the Dolphin under Captain Wallis, and is now bound to do the same again in a manner to make Dick Whittington's cat weep with jealousy. After all, this is no folly, given that a good goat fed on kitchen scraps can provide the handsome return of 2 quarts of milk a day to be served on the officer's table, or on this voyage, the officer and gentleman's table. And as this particular goat is a champion proved to provide at least that amount and more, she can, thank you ma'am, that'll be a shilling, go round the world for 6pence, twice. Now beyond goat milk, they need victuals enough to last them 18 months. James Cook oversees the purchase of such things as 5 tons of barrelled flour, 185 pounds of Great Devonshire cheese, salt beef by the ton, seemingly endless biscuits, known as hard tack or sea biscuits by the Jack Tars who love to hate the things, and vinegar. The list seems endless, but not unmanageable for a former grocer's apprentice like James Cook. Cook receives instructions advising that His Majesty's bark the Endeavour, at Deptford, being fitted out for a distant voyage, will afford an opportunity for a fair trial to be made of the efficacy of sauerkraut against the scurvy. A proportion for 12 months for 70 men will be sent at the rate of £2 per man per week. Cook is delighted. sure that the almost 3.5 tons of sauerkraut will keep men in good kilter and the voyage on course. Yes, there might be resistance from the sailors to eat that much fermented cabbage, but Cook has his own firm ideas how that can be overcome. In addition, the Admiralty instructs Cook to purchase and serve the men malt wort, a dense liquid extracted from the mashed malt used to brew beer, which is thought to fend off the dreaded sailor's affliction. For alcohol, 250 barrels of beer are rolled aboard, with 44 barrels of brandy, and yo-ho-ho, 17 barrels of rum. The next morning at Galleon's Reach, Captain Cook watches from the quarterdeck as 10 4-pounder cannons and 8 swivel guns, at 2 feet 10 inches long, they are more movable than cannon and can even be taken onto the longboat, along with all the gunners' stores, including barrels of powder, are brought on board. The sailors mount all 8 swivel guns and 6 of the 6-foot-long cannon on the upper deck, while the other 4 cannon are taken below and stored in the hold. The guns, mind, are not to defend the Endeavour from the French or the like, so much as to give her the firepower that might be necessary should they find in foreign climes that the natives are restless. And now everyone stand back as we manhandle the guns on board, even as the Endeavour sinks an inch lower in the water for the added weight of over 7 tons. On the 22nd of July, Captain Cook receives orders from the Admiralty advising that after conferring with the Royal Society, you are hereby required and directed to receive on board Mr. Charles Green and his servant and baggage, as also the said Joseph Banks, Esquire, and his suite, consisting of 8 persons with their baggage. So begins the fantabulous tale of Mr. Banks's voyage, which spreads faster than a delicious rumour through the parlours of London. Banks, naturalistically enough, has gone ahead and specially selected his entourage, led by the eminent Swedish naturalist Dr. Daniel Solander, who just a couple of weeks before was released from his duties at the British Museum. There is also artist Sidney Parkinson, a 22-year-old quiet Quaker from Edinburgh, with a particular aptitude for accurately drawing and painting flora and fauna, as he had already done spectacularly well with those specimens Banks had brought back from Newfoundland, while also being possessed of a certain resolution of purpose which Banks believes will stand them in good stead on the long voyage to come. In a similar vein, another artist, Alexander Buchan, a 24-year-old from Scotland, will draw landscapes and peoples. Yes, he is a physically infirm kind of man. He suffers from occasional fits that take over his whole body. But his art is so outstanding, Banks just can't leave him behind. To assist Mr. Banks and Dr. Solander in the scientific examination and cataloguing of whatever they find, they decide to bring Herman Sporing, a somewhat sombre fellow Swede, who for the past 2 years has been Dr. Solander's clerk, secretary, and draftsman at the British Museum. All of them will be waited on by 4 personal servants. Peter Briscoe and John Roberts are tapped to come from Revesby Abbey, Banks's family estate, while 2 further black servants, Thomas Richmond and George Dalton, are also hired. In fact, those black servants are little more than slaves by another name. Most likely born in Jamaica, they are among 10,000 slaves in England at the time, bought and paid for from slave masters down at the West India Quay in the Thames, and thereafter obliged to work for whoever has bought them, in this case Joseph Banks. Whatever the nomenclature of servants, possessing slaves at this time in London marks you as a man of means, and that is precisely what Joseph Banks is. Banks completes the entourage by bringing his 2 favourite greyhounds, the favoured dogs of the high-born since the days of the Pharaohs, and the only dogs mentioned in the Bible, for the simple pleasure of their company. They include his favourite bitch, Lady. As to where they will all sleep, Joseph Banks has ideas, and more importantly, he has the monetary means and the weight of the Admiralty behind him to make his ideas reality. And so he prepares lengthy written instructions for refitting the Endeavour's great cabin, a spacious central dining room known as the gentlemen's quarters or officers' mess, located directly under the quarterdeck, which usually has 2 cabins reserved for the captain and his most senior officer. Under Banks's instructions, it is to be refitted to accommodate science and the men who study it. First and foremost, one Joseph Banks, Esquire, along with Mr. Green, Dr. Solander, and Mr. Sporing. At Banks's insistence, for class must travel first class, he personally will take the captain's cabin, on the starboard side, while Cook will sleep in the near-identical one on the port side. Those cabins come complete with a small 4-paned square window looking into the central mess. Mr. Green, Dr. Solander, and Mr. Sporing are to take the cabins that are to be built encircling the gentlemen's quarters, each with 7-foot ceilings, for plenty of comfort. The cabins of Cook's officers, Lieutenants Gore and Hicks, are usurped as they are relegated to the much smaller cabins, just 5 feet bump on the head from floor to ceiling, and 6 foot across, that lie below the great cabin, on the rear lower deck that surrounds the mate's mess. Yes, they will likely be miserably uncomfortable for a voyage around the entire world, but Captain Cook is firm in the face of their complaints. Everything must be done to accommodate commodious accommodations as close to the class of Banks's entourage as possible. Only the best for Banks. Banks wishes the shared space in the great cabin to be luxuriously fitted out, stipulating green baize on the floor, a big table with comfortable leather chairs, and a total of 6 windows, so there is plenty of light for them to work, and a great view, 2 windows on each side of the ship, and 4 bigger windows at the stern. Banks also wishes to have a transom seat installed below the 4 round-topped stern windows set into rectangular openings, so they may sit and observe the fish, birds, or other beasts that play in the ship's wake, not to mention a place where his beloved greyhounds may like to curl up for a long nap. And only the best quality for everything. Send me the bills and they will be paid promptly. The arrangements for Banks's entourage will see them travelling in relative great comfort, at least in comparison to the 70-odd sailors whose own living space on the lower decks is dark, cramped and smelly. Mr. Joseph Banks is informed that many of his suggested changes to the great cabin will indeed be made once the ship is at Plymouth, the real starting point for their voyage. As ever, through a combination of charm, powerful friends, and inherited wealth, young Joseph gets precisely what he wants, spending so much it could drain several banks, with nothing to be left to chance. Indeed, so numerous is their equipment that it shocks Banks himself, who writes to a friend, "I take also, besides ourselves, 2 men to draw, and 4 more to collect in the different branches of natural history, and such a collection of bottles, boxes, baskets, bags, nets, etc., etc., has almost frightened me who have prepared them." And of course they must have bird cages in which to keep whatever exotic avian species they might find, and hundreds of quires of paper for pressing and drying the flowers, leaves, and the like. As paper is in such short supply in the 1760s, they end up securing printers' proofs of Milton's book Paradise Lost, which would otherwise have been thrown out. Indeed, Banks's friend Mr. Ellis writes a long letter to Carl Linnaeus himself, enthusing on just how far the botanist's £10,000 has gone. "No people ever went to sea better fitted out for the purpose of natural history," he writes. "They have got a fine library of natural history. They have all sorts of machines for catching and preserving insects, all kinds of nets, trawls, drags, and hooks for coral fishing. They have even a curious contrivance of a telescope, by which, put into the water, you can see the bottom at a great depth, where it is clear." On and on the unique list goes. In time it is done, and all loaded in the holds of the Endeavour. 30th of July, 1768. Admiralty House, London. Signed, secret, and delivered. With practised flourish, Admiralty Secretary Philip Stevens signs at the bottom of the document that lies on the desk before him, just as he does dozens of times a week. This particular document he has just authorised, however, is different. These are the final instructions for Captain James Cook of His Majesty's bark Endeavour, bound for Tahiti and beyond, and they are in two parts, sealed in separate envelopes, the second of which is to be opened only after the transit of Venus, and yes, such security is important. The Admiralty can't risk a Jack of the legless and loquacious variety blabbing the beans on England's secret search for the mysterious southern land to a Spanish spy in some port town alehouse. Britain must get there first. The envelopes are handed to his clerk, with instructions that they be delivered personally to the good captain himself, and it is soon done. Godspeed, Captain Cook. Shortly afterwards, Captain Cook receives the envelopes from the humble clerk with a grace and gratitude to which the young fellow is not always accustomed, but it is Cook's way. He will not forget he is a man who has risen through the ranks, not a man born into one. But yes, while of course in England every man's home is his castle, in this case it is his ship, and now that he has the awaited instructions, the good captain gives some firm if loving orders to his first mate, Elizabeth, now again heavy with child, and his eager crew of two young boys, Nathaniel and James Jr., and his bonny baby girl, Elizabeth Jr. You shall accompany me down to the Endeavour for a look-see, before the pilot and his crew take it from Galleon's Reach down to the Downs, navigating the lower Thames and the treacherous estuary, whence I will take back command from the Navy pilot and sail for Plymouth. Aye, aye, Captain. Sure enough, the boys are beside themselves with excitement, and it is only for care of the enormous first mate that they all must move gently. At last, though, they are out the door, and James Cook has his whole family with him as they take a carriage down to Galleon's Reach. Oh, how the lads' eyes widen to the size of tea-saucers, filled with wonder, just as their father's had when he first dropped down into Whitby all those years ago to see the huge cats anchored in the port. "Which one is yours, Daddy? Which one is yours?" "That one, right there." "That one." Oh, how truly grand the Endeavour looks to wee lads who have little else to compare it to. All they know is that their father is a great man, and has command of this ship. And yes, he will soon be going away for a long time, which is sad, but he is with them today on this great adventure, and that is all that counts. Taken out by a waiting tender, the Cook family boards the ship, and the boys run excitedly about and even climb a little way up the rigging before both parents sternly call them down. If Elizabeth is the sterner of the two, it is understandable. Exhausted, she is about to lose her husband to this very ship, a vessel that will take him to the other side of the world, and, she prays, back to her again. Still, as the passive face is key to the success of a card sharp, or so Lord Sandwich insists, so too is stoicism the stock in trade of a good Navy officer's wife. She is worried and wan, but does her best to hide both, the better to ease the passage of that boldest and most daring of men, her husband, Captain James Cook. The main thing now is to enjoy as a family what little time they have left together, before inevitably a week later he really must say goodbye to them all, and this time she cannot hold back as her tears flow and he puts his arms around both her and their baby inside her, even as the children crowd in for a final family embrace. The carriage waits outside, with his trunk already placed upon it. Murmuring softly, affirming his love for them all, assuring Elizabeth he will stay safe and lovingly telling the boys that they must look after their mother and help her with the coming baby, James Cook straightens himself, duty calls as ever, and walks out the door. This is the life he has chosen, and it has been very good to him so far. In a moment he is gone, on his way from their mile-end home, and soon enough headed down the Thames to the Downs, where the Endeavour now awaits his arrival just beyond the most difficult parts of the river. 7th of August, 1768. The Downs, England. Ship shapes. They are not a chatty pair. Captain Cook is a man more often than not content with his thoughts, while Charles Green only truly comes alive at night when gazing at the stars, and even then his activities do not much lend themselves to conversation. But on this grey day they are both at least light of spirit, as they travel together in a carriage from London down the cobblestoned roads to the Downs, to board their awaiting ship, on their way at last in service of science and England. Following protocol, the tinny blast of a tin whistle reaches them as the boatswain's mate summons the ship's company to form up on the deck to receive the captain, before piping him aboard, with his best impression of a maritime martial tune. Cook makes his way to the top of the gangway thus, and is greeted by several dozen men, all offering a salute which the Yorkshireman returns. Captain Cook, for the first time wearing the distinctive tricorn hat of the captain, is nevertheless quick to climb down through the hatchway on the quarter-deck and make his way to his private room in the great cabin. Here he takes the Admiralty's sealed secret instructions from his breast pocket, only to be opened after observing the transit, and places the envelope in the captain's strong-box, a solid oak box ribbed with iron and chained to the floor of his private cabin, designed to thwart thieves, defy dilettantes, and survive shipwrecks. He clicks the padlock shut and puts the key in the inside breast pocket of his jacket, safely on his person, where it shall stay for the duration of the voyage. The next day Cook gives the order, "Take her out, Mr. Molyneux," which sees a series of cascading orders from there until "Anchor away!" comes the cry of the boatswain, John Gathray, some 10 minutes later, and so begins the journey down to the great British naval launching ground that is Plymouth Sound. For all the excitement in the Royal Society over the coming expedition to these new worlds, there are some who have qualms, led by none other than their president, Lord Morton, and he has some real concerns. Leading those concerns is the treatment of the natives in these new worlds that the expedition will encounter. A Scot, a humanitarian, both by nature and upbringing, a philosopher trained to take an overview of life on this planet, Lord Morton is a truly enlightened man. An intellectual colleague of Montesquieu and David Hume, he has thought long and hard on the subject of mankind, and there are a few things he wants Captain Cook, Joseph Banks, and Dr. Daniel Solander to bear in mind as they take their leave. Writing them a collective letter, he sets them out. He begins with the most important point, that they exercise the utmost patience and forbearance with respect to the natives of the several lands where the ship may touch, to check the petulance of the sailors and restrain the wanton use of firearms, to have it still in view that shedding the blood of these people is a crime of the highest nature. They are human creatures, the work of the same omnipotent author, equally under his care with the most polished European, perhaps being less offensive, more entitled to his favour. They are the natural and, in the strictest sense of the word, the legal possessors of the several regions they inhabit. No European nation has a right to occupy any part of their country or settle among them without their voluntary consent. Conquest over such people can give no just title, because they could never be the aggressors. They may naturally and justly attempt to repel intruders, whom they may apprehend are come to disturb them in the quiet possession of their country, whether that apprehension be well or ill-founded. Therefore, should they in a hostile manner oppose a landing and kill some men in the attempt, even this would hardly justify firing among them, till every other gentle method had been tried. If a landing can be effected, whether with or without resistance, it might not be amiss to lay some few trinkets, particularly looking-glasses, upon the shore. Lastly, to form a vocabulary of the names given by the natives to the several things and places which come under the inspection of the gentleman. The foregoing hints hastily put together and probably very incorrect, and however humbly submitted to the consideration of Captain Cook and the other gentlemen by their hearty well-wisher and most obedient servant, Morton. Chiswick, Wednesday, 10th of August, 1768. At last finishing his wide-ranging hints, Lord Morton places the quill back on its stand, and after placing the letter in an envelope, affixes his wax seal. As Cook is already aboard the ship down in Plymouth, Morton sends the letter off to Joseph Banks, who has not yet left London, with the request that he deliver it to the captain. Midshipman Jonathan Monkhouse, just 19 years old, could not be more pleased. At last, after all the preparations, all the lead-up, Captain Cook and his men of the Endeavour have a tedious passage down the Channel. But they finally arrive at Plymouth on the 14th of August, meaning they are now not far away from leaving. Of their arrival at Plymouth, the younger Monkhouse records, "Got the ship into a proper berth betimes this morning. Captain Cook and I went ashore before breakfast to send an express to Mr. Banks acquainting him of our arrival here. We found the postmistress extremely pert." Monkhouse can barely contain himself. He is about to meet the fair maidens of Tahiti, women he has heard ever so much about. Can the tales really be true? As for Mr. Banks, the letter he received from James Cook has requested his immediate presence in Plymouth. Not that they are quite ready to sail, for at the Admiralty's Plymouth office the next day, Captain Cook receives instructions to increase the number of sailors to 85, and to receive aboard 12 Royal Marines, all of whom are armed and arriving soon. Furthermore, he is told, shipwrights will be coming aboard to make changes to the great cabin, so it may accommodate not only yourself but also your entourage of gentlemen. For a high-born Navy captain, such an arrangement may have been untenable, but for James Cook, whose first ship was hardship, sleeping under a shop counter with cockchafers and weevils nibbling him, it is fine. Cook's men are busy loading the ship for the long voyage ahead. Fresh meat, bags of fresh bread, beer and water, the men are physically and mentally preparing for the trip of a lifetime, when a boat approaches. The regular sailors pause in their important work to watch as 12 Marines in shining red coats climb up the ship's ladder, stride by the sailors on deck, and disappear through the hatch, bound for the lower decks. Captain Cook records in his log, "Received on board a supply of bread, beer and water. A sergeant, corporal, drummer, and 9 private marines as part of the complement." They are a rough bunch, to say the least, though at least at their head they have a sergeant in John Edgecombe, who, in the words of Captain Cook, is very much a gentleman, and has a certain way with his men, in part built on a kind of running banter. Yes, he chides and barks at all his privates when the occasion requires, but at heart he is perpetually amused, never more so than when making a joke of one of his charges for the entertainment of the others. One such is a wayfish lad by the name of William Greenslade, who can't be more than 16, and wears his fear on his face, always looking as scared as a lost child, which he essentially is. Never mind, Sergeant Edgecombe will have some fun at his expense, and make him a man bit by bit. The next day, work on the great cabin begins. Captain Cook recording in his log, "Several shipwrights and joiners from the yard employed on board refitting the gentlemen's cabins, and making an exercise platform over the tiller." Yes, Captain Cook will make his men exercise when off duty and not sleeping. There can be no idleness on his ship. 15th of August, 1768. The King's Theatre. Beaucoup de blessés is not enough. For all of the loyal followers that Joseph Banks is taking with him, the cherished person most on his mind is the one he is leaving behind, his 20-year-old fiancée, dear Mademoiselle Harriet Blosset, a blue-eyed brunette with the delicate neck of a swan and the most perfect unblemished alabaster skin. An exquisite beauty, The perfect symmetry of her features contrasts with the mess of beautiful curls that surround her irresistibly pretty face. Their romance has surprised many, on quite a few grounds, not least of which is that Mademoiselle Blosset is French and cannot speak a word of English, while Banks, as a proud Englishman, cannot speak a word of French. Banks is not fussed. He and this woman he characterizes as the fairest of the flowers speak the language of love, and that is all that counts. He just wishes he had told her that he is about to depart, heading off around the world for 3 years. He had meant to many times, at least in sign language, but every time he had tried, they'd been distracted by other things, and so he had kept putting it off. She will likely be upset when she finds out, which is a pity. As it happens, the timing of his departure is a little awkward. For on this evening of the 15th of August, 1768, Banks is at the King's Theatre to see the opera La Buona Figliola, and is sitting with Harriet and Dr. Solander when a message is passed to him, which has been written by Captain Cook only hours before, directing him to come to Plymouth directly, for the Endeavour is about to sail. As it happens, the geologist Horace de Saussure is at the opera with them, and will later recount how, at supper afterwards, while Joseph proceeds to get rip-roaring drunk, Mademoiselle Blosset, who is clearly deeply in love with him, proceeds, oblivious, wondering only why her dear fiancé is calling for ever more "waiter, if you please, bottles of wine." And so it goes. Banks, de Saussure will recount, drank freely to hide his feelings. The amount of alcohol imbibed, or perhaps Banks's naturally loquacious nature, surely explains why, despite de Saussure having never met Banks before, the gay young blade boasts to him of how strong his connections are high up in the Admiralty, and their secret instructions whereby, after observing the passage, they will endeavour to make discoveries in the Southern Ocean and return by the East Indies. Those instructions are now a little less secret than they were. Either way, the next morning Mademoiselle Blosset wakes to find herself unaccountably alone. There is no Joseph, and no note, no clue as to où il est. Where can he be? Chapter 4. Leaving England. Endeavour, labour directed to some certain end. Samuel Johnson, a Cook contemporary and Banks's acquaintance, in his dictionary published in 1755. Come, come, my jolly lads, the wind's abaft, brisk gales our sails shall crowd. Then bustle, 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 boys, haul the boat, the boatswain's pipe aloud. All hands on board, our ship's unmoored, the rising gale fills every sail, our ship's well manned and stored. The farewell shanty, Sling the Flowing Bowl, beloved by sailors in Cook's time. 19th of August, 1768. Plymouth. All aboard. Regulation before navigation. A motley crew, yes, but still as healthy and certainly as well presented as they are likely to be at any time in the next 2 years. They stand some 85 strong, alongside the 12 strong Marines, in the sparkling morning light, gathered around Captain Cook as he prepares to read out the Articles of War. 36 clauses on discipline and punishment, the formidable rule-book of the British Navy, which, for every sailor, is both Bible and law. As they know, this is a ritual that takes place before every ship of the Royal Navy leaves home port on a mission, and the men stand silent before their captain as he begins. 1. All commanders, captains, and officers, in or belonging to any of His Majesty's ships or vessels of war, shall cause the public worship of Almighty God, according to the liturgy of the Church of England, and the Lord's Day be observed according to law. The men gaze vacantly back, with vaguely respectful but infinitely bored faces that resemble a half-hungover congregation on a Sunday morning. It is not out of lack of respect for the rules or for Cook himself. It is because they have heard this list every month since joining the Navy. They know it better than the Lord's Prayer, and regard it in much the same way. A great guide when under scrutiny, but otherwise to be ignored. In any case, as they have divined that Cook is not particularly religious and has not included a chaplain on this voyage, it means this particular edict carries little weight, and it is Captain Cook himself who will have to do the honours when it comes to conducting services. But onwards Cook must read. 2. All flag officers and all persons in or belonging to His Majesty's ships or vessels of war, being guilty of profane oaths, cursings, execrations, drunkenness, uncleanness, or other scandalous actions, in derogation of God's honour, and corruption of good manners, shall incur such punishment as a court-martial shall think fit to impose, and as the nature and degree of their offence shall deserve. And on the list goes. There shall be no wasteful expense of any powder, shot, ammunition. If any person in the fleet shall commit the unnatural and detestable sin of buggery and sodomy with man or beast, he shall be punished with death by the sentence of a court-martial. These articles do not mince words. They spell out as precisely and sharply as a cat-o'-nine-tails what waits for any man who breaks the code. Finally, Cook informs the men they are to now receive 2 months' pay in advance of their leaving the port. This time they are listening. You are not to expect any additional pay for the performance of our voyage, he adds, scanning the sea of faces before him, which all appear more than happy with the arrangements. They were well satisfied, Cook records in his journal that evening, and expressed great cheerfulness and readiness to prosecute the voyage. 25th of August, 1768, Plymouth Sound. Mr. Banks, I presume. On this auspicious afternoon, the ebullient figures being rowed out to the Endeavour at anchor in Plymouth Sound are of course none other than Joseph Banks, Esquire, and Dr. Solander, who have journeyed from London courtesy of Banks's driver and carriage, then stayed in a hotel on shore while the great cabin was being refitted. Now their suite has preceded them on board, and as they approach, the last men to take their berths, they survey the scene before them, with no little excitement. For there is now the shining ship, the Endeavour, the King's pennant flying high atop the mainmast, signalling that all persons should report on board as the vessel is about to proceed to sea. The hull and decks are all scrubbed down, and the crew are scrubbed up for the occasion. A modest vessel, yes, it almost looks a little shy to be out there in the Sound, anchored among His Majesty's finest, largest, fastest and sleekest men of war, what with her own diminutive length and unusually broad waist, a mark of her common birthright as a collier for the coal trade. But she is on a mission, to go where none of them has ever dared venture, and so holds her place. Around her, in these last busy hours before departure, a handful of small service craft are fussing like chicks around a brooding mother hen, darting back and forth as the last of fresh supplies are hauled up, the sailors from on high hauling hard as the final boxes and barrels are brought aboard. It is a first day, like the first day at a new school, when old routines seem somehow new and a nervous energy flows through every greeting. It is the first day when all Navy crew and civilian passengers are assembled, a day of laconic lags tugging their forelocks to fresh-faced midshipmen, even as day-old acquaintances are renewed and new friendships formed. 2 such strangers greet each other on the deck this very morn. Mr. Banks, I presume. Captain Cook shakes the hand of Joseph Banks for the first time. 2 men whose lives have been leading to this moment, yet remarkably have never met until both are on the deck of the Endeavour. Life has dealt them entirely different cards, and they have played them in an entirely different fashion. And yet, somehow, fate has meant that not only has their ship come in, but they will go out on it together. Early the next afternoon, the 26th of August, with the last of the lashing southwest winds and rains past, and with a mild, fresh wind veering northerly, a single jack at the fore-topmast, the sailors on watch scurrying around the decks, and Captain Cook surrounded by officers and gentlemen on the quarter-deck, he is at last able to give the command. "Weigh anchor!" The moment is recorded in Cook's HMS Endeavour log. At 2 p.m, got under sail and put to sea, having on board 94 persons, including officers, seamen, gentlemen, and their servants, nearly 18 months' provisions, 10 cannon, 12 swivel guns, with good store of ammunition and stores of all kinds. As England starts to sink into the horizon, many of the men on board, most particularly those who are not sailors, among them newly engaged surgeon's mate 21-year-old William Perry, for whom a disappearing England is an entirely new experience, crowd the stern. Also among them is young Isaac Smith, the cousin of Captain Cook's wife, Elizabeth. And yet, in the strictest of terms, young Isaac is not the only one on the muster roll from Cook's family, for in fact it also includes James and Nathaniel, Captain Cook's 2 sons, aged 5 and 6, and their salary will be paid. Of course they are not on board, and it is no more than a relative standard ruse employed by naval captains to which the Lords of the Admiralty generally turn a blind eye, as they often did much the same thing when they were younger. By putting absent family members on the roster, you lift your own salary, and have a record that the young ones actually went to sea this young, which marks them down as having much more experience than they have, for when they actually enter the naval service. Just along a little is Alex Weir, a married man in his mid-30s, a cheerful, if sensitive soul, though no less a sailor because of it. Hailing from Fife, Scotland, he's been aboard ships since Adam first jumped on a floating log, and is now excited that the expedition is truly underway. Still, as always at this stage of a voyage, he is wondering if he will ever tread upon the shores of his homeland again. 2 others wondering the same thing are Joseph Banks's 2 black servants, Thomas Richmond and George Dalton, except this is not their home shore, and they are not free men. On the one hand, travelling like this, free to move around as the servants of Mr. Banks, feels like luxury, but on the other, they are still a long way from their home of Jamaica. Meanwhile, the mood aboard is happy and relieved to get under way, with Banks chronicling that "we at last got a fair wind, and set sail, all in excellent health and spirits perfectly prepared, in mind at least, to undergo with cheerfulness any fatigues or dangers that may occur in our intended voyage." While Banks and his fellow landlubbers in his entourage must initially struggle to overcome the effects of seasickness, for the first 12 hours you're afraid you're going to die, in the next 6 hours you're afraid you're not going to die. At least they take no little satisfaction in how well prepared they are for the journey ahead. With one last mighty push and wail, it is done. Elizabeth Cook is delivered of a wee baby boy, Joseph, the 4th child of James Cook, who set sail into the unknown just the day before. Drenched in sweat, her face as red as a radish, Elizabeth takes the swaddled bundle from the midwife and holds him tightly to her breast, saying a prayer that he be healthy. If only James could be here. But he is not, and she is resigned to it, something she had accepted would be her likely fate when she married that blessed man. She rights herself once more and gets on with it, as she is ever wont to do. The following morning already finds Banks and Dr. Solander afloat on a fresh natural world, beside themselves with enthusiasm, as they closely observe a shoal of playful porpoises in the English Channel, Banks chronicling, "Probably the Delphinus phocana of Linnaeus, as their noses are very blunt." The other thing that is blunt, of course, and a little too blunt for Mr. Banks, who is impatient to botanize in lands unknown, is the nose of the Whitby-built Endeavour. Just 2 days after leaving Plymouth, Banks finds the going too slow for his liking and realizes that the Whitby Cat will not be a fast ship, but a steady one, much more calculated for stowage than for sailing. Of course, under the circumstances, Banks can hardly complain about the space given over to stowage, given that his own luggage, instruments, bottles and books are already taking up the majority of the stowage space. Already, however, his men are busy, with Banks and Dr. Solander occupying themselves, hauling creatures from the sea, so that, the best he can, Sidney Parkinson can draw them. Alas, in these first days of the voyage, when they are still in North Atlantic waters off the coast of Spain, the weather proves to be so bad, and the ship rocks so violently, that the young artist could not set to his pencil. The following day, Banks records it as being even worse. "Wind still foul, ship in violent motion," he writes, though as the evening settles, so too does the ship, and finally Banks's stomach. It is only a short respite, however, as by the 1st of September, 1768, even so seasoned a sailor as Cook notes in the log how foul the weather is, particularly to fowls. Cook log, 1st of September, 1768. Thursday, September the 1st. Very hard gales with some heavy showers of rain. The most part of these 24 hours, which brought us under our two courses, broke one of our main topmast futtock plates, washed overboard a small boat belonging to the boatswain, and drowned between 3 and 4 dozen of our poultry, which was worst of all. But when the sun comes out a couple of days later, and the winds calm, Mr. Banks and Dr. Solander get back to executing their raison d'etre on this journey, discovering, collecting and classifying the natural world. Of course, it is Banks' servants who do most of the grunt work, forever traipsing behind the unencumbered gentleman, lugging their equipment or their collections, or both. A gentleman does not lug, and certainly never lugs luggage. Among their gatherings on this blessed day are 2 new kinds of marine worm, which they name Rostrata and Stramosa. Only 1 of Rostrata and 2 of Stramosa were taken. It seems singular that no naturalist before this time should have taken notice of these animals, as they abound so much where the ship now is, not 20 leagues from the coast of Spain. From hence, however, great hopes may be formed, that the inhabitants of the deep have been but little examined, and as Dr. Solander and myself shall have probably greater opportunity in the course of this voyage than anyone has had before us, it is a very encouraging circumstance to hope that so large a field of natural history has remained almost untrod, even till this time, and that we may be able from this circumstance alone, almost unthought of when we embarked in the undertaking, to add considerable light to the science which we so eagerly pursue. Still, as the journey goes on and the winds start to blow stronger, the Endeavour is sailing so well at the hands of such a skilled captain and crew that Banks has a new complaint, recorded on the 7th of September, 1768. "The wind was now fair, and we went very pleasantly on towards our destined port, though rather too fast for any natural inquiries. For my own part, I could well dispense with a much slower pace, but I fancy few in the ship, Dr. Solander excepted, are of the same opinion." For the moment, Banks decides not to raise the subject with Captain Cook. For one thing, he really does understand that their orders to get to this new South Sea Island paradise in time to set everything up to observe the transit of Venus must be closely followed. For another, Banks's regard for Captain Cook is growing daily. Though not particularly well versed in Banks's field of botany, there is no doubt that Captain Cook's interest in and knowledge of matters of science is really quite extraordinary. The fact that he is eager to learn more and asks acute questions is impressive, and as for his part, Cook is equally pleased to spend time with both Banks and Dr. Solander, as it is a rare pleasure aboard a ship to be able to keep company with men of such learning, who knows so many things that he does not. In some ways, it is like being back on the Pembroke a decade ago in Halifax, with Captain Simcoe and Lieutenant Holland. It shouldn't be a problem sharing a confined space with these men for the next couple of years. True, Mr. Banks is not always the most generous of companions, invariably doing only what suits Mr. Banks. But it is truly said of the portly Dr. Solander that he is exceedingly sober, well-behaved, and very diligent. I can assure you the more he is known, the more he is liked. On the 10th of September, the Endeavour, pushing south, crosses an imaginary line that means they are no longer a tiny dot off the map of Europe, but now, effectively, an even tinier dot off the much larger map of Africa. Today, for the first time, we dined in Africa, records Banks, with no little satisfaction. For the botanist, it prompts melancholy thoughts on how they are taking their leave of Europe, for heaven alone knows how long, perhaps forever. That thought demands a sigh as a tribute due to the memory of friends left behind, and they have it. But two cannot be spared. It would give more pain to the sire than pleasure to those sighed for. 14th of September, 1768, Madeira. At anchor, and a man down. It is, of course, the way of shipboard life. So intense is the daily experience, so unrelenting that you soon become intimate with the details of lives of men you'd never met just a month ago. You dine with them, bathe with them, work with them, see them under pressure, when they're under the weather, when they're drunk, when they recover, and within only a few short weeks you know them every bit as well as your childhood friends. And what strange stories some of them have to tell. The snuff-sniffing surgeon, William Monkhouse, for example. No, he still doesn't want to talk about it. But he told me on the quiet that just a few years ago his wife of the decade, Jane, had been arrested for stealing a cloak, been tried at the Old Bailey, and transported in chains to North America to serve 7 years penal servitude. Oh, the humiliation! No wonder he wants to get away from it all. No wonder there is always sadness in his rheumy eyes. Matching him in the slightly lugubrious stakes is the Scottish artist Sidney Parkinson, a man with the soul of an artist born to a family of quiet Quakers that had never quite understood his passion for drawing. He had waited for his father to die before pursuing his dream of a life in art in London. There he had come across Joseph Banks, who had instantly recognized his phenomenal drawing ability, and, well, here he is. Only just as he here, though, as his bird-like physique, without an ounce of either fat or muscle, and complete with a beaked nose, means it really looks as if he might blow away in the first squall. An intelligent, good man, yes, but oh so serious. He is the lone teetotaling Quaker aboard the Endeavour, which marks him out as a different kind of man from the start. Abstinence is like celibacy for most of the rum-swilling, foul-mouthed sailors. They have heard of it, but don't like the sound of it, and certainly never witnessed it up close. Still, with the right amount of jollying along, Sydney really can be good company, which is something no one says about Richard Orton, Captain Cook's clerk. A cheat's cheat, a cur's cur. He is very open about the fact that he had once been a mighty purser in the Royal Navy before various roguery had seen him savagely demoted to his current humble role. Here, as a contemporary William Perry would describe it, he managed the victualling department with such a degree of cunning as did not at all tend to whitewash his old and known character. He messed by himself, and had no man his friend. He gloried in recounting anecdotes of his own disgraces, and, drunk or sober, exhibited to the life a low-bred, foul-mouthed blackguard.
This ends CD 4. CD 5.
These proved to be merely Perry's opening remarks. How this wretch Orton should find himself in such close affiliation with the seemingly fastidious and principled Captain Cook is a mystery to Perry. Far more popular is the master Robert Molyneux, even if Cook has a constant struggle to keep him from losing himself to the bottle, giving him a constant round of tasks to keep him busy. The only one on board who can keep pace with Master Molyneux on the grog is the sailmaker, John Ravenhill, 70 years old if he's a day, who has had a lot more practice than anyone. Charles Green, the principal astronomer on board, when not serving his navigational calculations by shooting the sun, so called because the astronomer looks like an archer as he sets his sextant aloft and aims it at his yellow target, mostly he pines quietly for his wife, Elizabeth, who he had married only 6 months earlier. So many nights of their married life he had been at the observatory, while she lay cold in her bed, while now he is to be away from her for perhaps 700 nights in succession. Is she all right? Will he be all right? And get back to see her again? Pining, pining, pining away. And so it goes, as the days pass and the men continue to get to know each other better. Mr. Banks, cordial but remote from the captain, chats with Midshipman Charlie Clerk to while away his evening. The two men in their mid-20s sitting by the back of the stove, where an open fire is reserved for officers and gentlemen to warm themselves. Banks and Clerk are two of a kind in any case, both quick with wit and women. Clerk is one of the very few men who gets to tweak the lordly Mr. Banks, joshing him about his wealth and ways with a roughish charm that makes Banks laugh and delight in his company. It is a fact Cook can't help but note. He and Banks are cordial colleagues at best, not friends. Neither would seek out the company of the other, were they not confined to this floating small kingdom. And yet, so too is the situation with all of the crew, as men from all parts of Britain, Ireland, and North America are thrown together, to shinny up ratlines together, set sails together, and spend many long evenings talking together, either in their quarters, where their hammocks hang side by side, or in the mess, 6 eating companions for every meal, huddled together, slurping their slop and talking of their lives, their loves, their problems and joys, and becoming ever closer. Meal over, those officers and sailors not on watch retire to their bunks for the former and hammocks for the latter, their respective quarters separated by the hammocks of the Marines, whose principal job is to defend sailors when on shore, the ship from external attack, and all other times to defend against mutiny, which is why 2 are on sentry duty outside Captain Cook's cabin for 24 hours a day, every day, while another defends the gunpowder stores to ensure no one gets close with a naked flame. And so it goes. Every man has a role, and together the men are a living, breathing organism afloat on the high seas. Overall, Captain Cook is happy with how things are proceeding. The crew is healthy, productive, and moving into the rhythm of the ship life. They all seem happy enough, their demeanour never more chipper than when the sun is over the foreyard, meaning it's about 11 a.m., which is when the boatswain's mate brings his trusty whistle to his lips and pipes the tune known to all sailors as Up Spirits. Promptly they all come a-running to receive their half-pint of grog, a concoction of 1 part rum to 4 parts water. Not that there aren't some problems, mostly with outbursts of drunken rowdiness, where the worst offender is the man whose very job it is to stop such outbursts, Master Robert Molyneux. As ever, so specialised are Master Molyneux's abilities, severely punishing him is not an option. His very expertise demands he be given some leeway and, "Pass the ale, young Isaac, and tell me if you hear the captain coming." The master continues to use it to full effect. After bringing the Endeavour into the picturesque Portuguese island port of Madeira and dropping anchor, Captain Cook faces the next rainy, squally morning with news that the heaviest anchor on the ship, the stream anchor, has not been properly secured and has detached completely from the ship. Grumbling lightly, for even in the face of bad errors of this kind, Cook is calm by nature, he takes quick action. Fortunately, they are in a sheltered port, so, rain notwithstanding, the Endeavour itself is not at risk, and the anchor's rope and buoys can be seen some 50 feet off to show where the anchor, all 800 weight of it, lies on the bottom. There is only one thing for it. Some sailors must take the cutter and haul the anchor up so that it may be rowed and rebound to the Endeavour. Cook gives the order to his experienced Scottish quartermaster. "Mr. Weir, heave up the anchor in the boat and carry it out to the southward." "Aye, aye, sir." Quartermaster Alex Weir had been anticipating this exact order, and quickly has the cutter lowered with his best men on board. All else being equal, it should only take a few minutes. Like all of them, Weir is eager to get everything ship-shape with the Endeavour in harbour so they can go ashore and enjoy what Madeira has to offer. Cook watches from a distance as the cutter is rowed forth before the buoy is taken on board. The rope is secured, and all together now they begin to haul on the rope to make the anchor first break its bond with the harbour floor and then make its long ascent from the watery depths. And heave, and heave, and heave! Yard by yard the stream anchor rises, and the coil of watery rope in the cutter starts to get a little in the way of the men hauling. Stepping forward to move some of the rope, Alex Weir is right in the middle of the coils when one of the men hauling on the anchor slips, meaning that the others get a sudden surge of weight. It makes another man slip, and with a shout he must let go. And now they are all shouting and cursing as, one after the other, they slip and let go until, inevitably, they all must release the rope or go over themselves, and it plunges to the bottom with Alex Weir right behind. Oh no. The quartermaster had been in the coils, and when they had tightened around his leg, he had been dragged over the side in a split second, and is now heading to the bottom, 22 fathoms deep. Heave to! Heave to! Cook yells from the Endeavour, and every man on the cutter pulls the mighty cable, the thrice-bound rope whose fathom lengths now bind the anchor and poor Weir. Perhaps there is a chance that Weir might break free, that even now he struggles with the rope to free himself as they drag him to the surface, to air, to the land of the living. Alas, alas, no. By the time the frantically heaving men manage to bring the rope back up, it is to find Weir, his legs still entangled, completely lifeless. Pale, swollen, eyes and mouth wide open in petrified panic, and with that extraordinary gluggy looseness of limbs that marks the newly drowned, Mr. Weir is brought back to the deck of the Endeavour, where his body is quickly sewn into part of an old sail, with tradition observed by putting the needle and twine through his nose, too, to eliminate any chance he is still alive. He is not, and somewhere in England his wife, Anne, is now a widow, and his children without a father. This voyage of the Endeavour has suffered its first fatality, and, as a dark shadow moves over nearly all in the ship's company, all are reminded that, even with so careful a captain as Cook, death may strike with the smallest slip. If you're not crushed by a falling yardarm, or left to drown after a slip from the mast into the sea as the ship sails on, something else might occur, as with poor Alex, to send you hurtling to your end in Davy Jones's locker. And yet, even a moment after death, life must continue. With a formality born of trying to keep his heavy emotions in check, Cook crisply orders the cutter to stand by, to receive the empty casks which must be taken ashore to be filled with wine. Yes, and the body of Mr. Weir, now enshrouded in canvas and weighed down with a cannonball, must be put into the yawl and taken to deeper water, where he is consigned to the deep. As ever, Captain Cook must record the day's events in the ship's log, and does so with the deepest of sorrows, pausing before writing the worst words of all. Hove up the anchor by the ship as soon as possible, and found his body entangled in the buoy rope. Joseph Banks is not on board to witness the whole tragedy. He and Dr. Solander are comfortably ensconced in the home of the English consul, a Mr. Cheap, whose abode is anything but cramped and damp. A wonderful change from the ship, particularly for Banks's greyhounds, which have revelled in being back on land. Even when Banks hears the news, the tragic loss of Alex Weir, has not been significant enough in the life of the botanist to rate a mention in his journal, which instead concentrates on what has really attracted his attention on this day: the island's general particularities and botanical features. The season of the year was undoubtedly the worst for both plants and insects, being the height of the vintage, when nothing is green in the country but just on the verge of small brooks by which these vines are watered. At least here in port, Captain Cook is able to move quickly to find a replacement. It is the American sailor John Thurman, who was approached by yet another American, albeit one wearing a British naval uniform, Lieutenant Gore, only to be informed that he will be press-ganged into His Majesty's Navy. To wake up in the morning as a free Yankee and fall asleep that night under the orders of a Yorkshireman is a bitter day indeed. But America is a colony, not blessed with the freedom and sovereignty that would give its colonists any independent rights. For now, Mr. Thurman is bound to the Endeavour. 16th of September, 1768. Madeira. If you don't eat your beef, you get lashes for pudding. In some ways it is like the old days back with Mr. Sanderson. For once again, James Cook is compiling a careful list of things that must be purchased, buying them and then checking to the last penny that he has received full value. He particularly does not want a shiny silver shilling to go missing. It is all just a difference of quantity. For here in Madeira, Captain James Cook is buying victuals for the entire ship. As per his written instructions, he takes on board water and wine, but he also insists on buying as many green vegetables and as much fresh beef as he can, together with a load of freshly dug onions. For Cook's view is that by far the most important defence against scurvy is his insistence that the men eat their greens, including whatever green things can be purchased, purloined or simply gathered at every port, as well as freshly slaughtered meat. Though he is not quite clear about the causes of scurvy, he has noticed that freshness and greenness seem to be the keys to avoiding it. To compensate for the fact that on long sea journeys green freshness is not possible, he wants his men to go with the next best thing, which is to consume greens that have been preserved as fresh as possible, which is to say sauerkraut, which is to say finely chopped raw cabbage, allowed to ferment for just the right amount of time before being put in tightly sealed barrels. So, too, are fresh supplies well received, with Captain Cook noting in his journal, "Received on board fresh beef and greens for the ship's company." It is Cook's way. At any new port, fresh supplies are the priority. The greener the vegetables, and the more freshly slaughtered the meat, the better. The next day dawns fine, no sign of rain clouds, but there's a different storm on the horizon. Brutality is not in Cook's nature, violence not in his spirit. Though not a gentleman by birth, he is certainly a gentleman by nature, and Quaker influences have helped to mould his soul. Most matters of discipline can be sorted out by having misbehaving sailors stand barefoot for hours on end in fair weather or foul, with their toes between the seams of the planks on deck, known as towing the line. In other matters, however, he must be more harsh. Ordering lashes to be given gives him no pleasure, and yet doing his job properly requires a certain hardening of that soul, an embrace of the brutality needed to keep the men in line, and he knows he must oversee the whole operation. Glowering, the seaman Henry Stevens, and the marine Thomas Dunster are brought from below, still in chains, and after their shirts are removed, they are lashed to a grate, placed vertical for the occasion, their arms above them, their backs entirely exposed as the ship's company follows Captain Cook's order, "All hands on deck to witness punishment," and gathers around, just forward, the mizzen mast. The charges are read out, and with a grim nod from Captain Cook, the boatswain's mate, Thomas Hardman, as non-eponymous in nature as his captain, to whom this kind of barbaric punishment does not come easily, though he knows it is his duty to administer it, gets to work. He steps forward. First is Thomas Dunster. Taking the cat-o'-nine-tails, a whip with 9 leather strands, with the end of each one having a small knot, From its red baize bag he dips the implement into a bucket of seawater, withdraws it, brings his right arm back well behind him, then swings it forward. There is a small hissing sound before a mighty crack rings out, a thwack on Dunster's back, the agonizing kiss of 9 salty electric eels, and on the instant angry red welts show up in strips across his pale skin. On it goes for a dozen lashes, until Dunster is untied to slump to the deck, where a bucket of seawater is thrown over his wounds and he is carried down to his hammock, to be swiftly replaced by Henry Stevens to receive his lashings of fate on the grate. 5 minutes later, the now bloody Stevens is untied to receive his own bucket of seawater. Let that be a lesson to all. This is what happens to those who refuse to eat fresh meat. Who knows why the meat would not appeal, but Cook is so obsessed with diet, with eating fresh food, that his men's refusal to do so has resulted in such a beating. Cook notes in his journal, "Punished Henry Stevens, seaman, and Thomas Dunster, marine, with 12 lashes each, for refusing to take their allowance of fresh beef." Others lashed include the new recruit Thurman, for refusing to assist the old sailmaker, the ever-drunk John Ravenhill. While on the 1st of December, another 2 men are lashed for abusive language to an officer and an intent to desert. And yet, as Cook feels that the lasher, John Redding, boatswain's mate, has not put his heart into the lashes, he too gets a dozen lashes. With 6 men lashed in 6 weeks, the point is made. Do not be deceived by the captain's mild nature. He can still hand out lashes with the best of them. As the Endeavour stays in port for resupply and caulking under the watch of ship's carpenter John Satterley, Mr. Banks and Dr. Solander are determined to make the most of it, even if it is not the ideal season. As Banks records, they rise at morning, ride out on horses supplied by the obliging Mr. Cheap, collect specimens of unknown plant life, return at night, eat, sleep, and repeat. One day Banks is aggrieved to find that the Governor of Madeira has requested the pleasure of his and Cook's company for luncheon. As a gentleman, of course, he must oblige, which means that he must waste an entire day that could otherwise be spent putting plants in bottles, which is his chief pleasure. As to the residents of Madeira, Banks is simply not interested in these well-heeled Englishmen, Spaniards, and Portuguese who he meets at the governor's table. For their species, their tribes are known. Banks wishes to make his mark by discovering unknown people, unknown plants, unknown animals, and unknown reptiles. It is the thrill of the new which excites his brilliant scientific mind, and he has little time or patience for small talk with small folk of known origins, and sorry, you were saying, Governor? In the end, despite the unfavourable season, Mr. Banks and Dr. Solander prove industrious during their short stay on Madeira, collecting around 300 species of plants, from salvia to rosemary. The entire collection of plant specimens, together with 200 insects and 20 new species of fish, once they have them back in the great cabin and ready to get to work, is to be described, preserved, labelled, and stored. Captain Cook is impressed by the endless series of new specimens that Mr. Banks and Dr. Solander return gleefully to the ship with each night. For his part, during the 5-day stay in Madeira, Captain Cook brings aboard 270 pounds of fresh meat that will fill the bellies of his men. And yet, on their way towards South America, the captain learns from his cooks that while the fresh meat has gone down a treat, the men have been leaving their sauerkraut uneaten. The surgeon's mate, young William Perry, takes it upon himself to approach his captain, the prevention of scurvy being a special province of his own interests. He notes that the crew has been supplied with a quantity of onions and boldly suggests an additional preventative supply of wort. 1 quart a day, perhaps? Cook surveys the young medico with surprise. He is the surgeon's mate, not the actual surgeon William Monkhouse, and it is not quite the place of the young man to make such a suggestion. Of course, Captain Cook already knows all about wort, and has brought barrels of it with him. Happily, there will be no problem in getting the ship's company to down the malt drink, as they already relish the sweet flavour, which is a welcome change from tepid water. But getting them to eat their sauerkraut is much more problematic, as not only do they not like it, but they also do not take the threat of scurvy as seriously as they should, even though it's been the end of many a man and almost as many ships. Very well. Cook can hardly flog the entire crew, so he uses a ruse, one that will long be regarded as evidence of Cook's understanding of the make-up of the common sailors, for he used to be one. With no fuss, Cook instructs his hook-handed cook, John Thompson, to dress the sauerkraut every day and serve it at the great cabin's dining table. If the captain and gentlemen eat it, surely the Jacks will take note. He further permits all the officers, without exception, to make use of it, and left it to the option of the men either to take as much as they pleased or none at all. Now, let's see if the crew turn up their noses at it. Yes, though not quite an old salt, James Cook certainly displays uncommon common sense, and is not without wiles. By hook or by crook, and with help from his cook with one hook, Captain Cook's men will eat their kraut. The result is all but instantaneous, at least in the perspective of long voyages at sea. This practice, Cook records, was not continued above a week before I found it necessary to put everyone on board to an allowance. For such are the tempers and disposition of seamen in general, that whatever you give them, out of the common way, although it be ever so much for their good, it will not go down, and you will hear nothing but murmurings against the man that first invented it. But the moment they see their superiors set a value upon it, it becomes the finest stuff in the world, and the inventor an honest fellow. Late September, 1768. 3 days out from Madeira. Of jaws and paws. See it there, on the horizon, way out in the distance? It's the peak of Tenerife, the sailors insist to Mr. Banks and Dr. Solander, who can barely distinguish a mountain from a cloud. If you say so. Far more enchanting for Mr. Banks are the dozens, if not hundreds, of flying fish that abound around the ship's stern, slipping through the wake and up into the air, where they soar for yards at a time. Mr. Banks soon works out that watching them from his cabin window gives him the best vantage point, as he records, "Their beauty, especially when seen from the cabin windows, is beyond imagination, their sides shining like burnished silver. When seen from the deck, they do not appear to such advantage, as their backs are then presented to the view, which are dark-coloured." And so it goes as the men settle into the rhythm of shipboard life, setting out for the long haul southwest across the Atlantic. The officers bark orders, the Jacks shinny up and down rigging and along yards, reefing or shaking out sails, all while John Thompson is as busy as a one-armed cook, feeding 3 meals to 100 men every day, and the gentlemen tend to the wildlife, catching and categorizing fish, sharks, birds, and anything else that crosses their path. For his part, Captain Cook is ever and always a calm presence on the quarter-deck, all-seeing, all-knowing, keeping one eye on the ship and the other on his men, and inspiring utmost confidence in every last man Jack aboard. Master Molyneux, however, has quite the opposite effect. When the last of the beer runs out on the 27th of September, and they have to serve only wine thereafter, no one is surprised. The master has been drunk from the first day on board, and if any man could drink the ship dry, it is him. On the 28th of September, Mr. Banks and the doctor, as Dr. Solander has become known to one and all, are thrilled to catch a small yellow swallow of cheeky but affectionate disposition, which they name Montacilla avida, in accordance with Linnaeus's system. Oh, and once they have properly examined him, they also name the birdlouse found on his feathers, Acorus motacillae. Once the windows and doors of the great cabin are tightly closed, they allow the dear little thing to fly about, and its small accidents notwithstanding, which the servants quickly clean up, it soon establishes a real bond with Mr. Banks and his gentleman. For yes, the swallow quickly makes itself quite at home, establishing favourite perches, hopping about Banks's writing bureau as he records the day's events in his journal, atop the piles of books everywhere, and accepting the offering of crushed insects with a gracious nod of its head and nip of its beak, and even sitting quietly to have its portrait done by Sidney Parkinson. No small yellow wagtail bird has ever been treated to such luxury, ever travelled so far from home, all the while watched by a single set of eyes, perpetually narrowing, waiting for the right moment. While the little bird is at one end of nature's spectrum of living creatures, tiny, harmless, Banks has at least as much interest in things at the other end, as on this day he looks out the cabin window to see a young shark swimming alongside the boat. By use of a baited hook, it is quickly caught and hauled up onto the deck. He proved, Banks records, to be the Squalus carcarius of Linnaeus, and assisted us in clearing up much confusion which almost all authors had made about that species. The very species that will become known as the great white shark is impressive indeed, but inspires no camaraderie as the yellow swallow has done. Instead, as Banks records, we made Swift to have a part of him stewed for dinner, and very good meat he was, at least in the opinion of Dr. Solander and myself, though some of the seamen did not seem to be fond of him, probably from some prejudice founded on the species sometimes feeding on human flesh. Indeed it is. The mariners have long had a superstition against eating something that eats mariners, and nothing the gentleman can say, no marinade the cook can make to hide it, will change their view. Captain Cook, with a foot planted in both worlds, for the mast and aft, does not engage, and is simply glad to eat his portion silently. One living being that has no qualms about eating another living being of any description is the ship's cat, who for weeks following the capturing and taming of the little yellow swallow, manoeuvres to do a little yellow swallow of its own. For the key, you see, is to betray but little interest and simply engage in waiting, waiting, waiting. Now! For one moment, on the 21st of October, the little bird is flitting about happily, and the next there is a snap. Yellow swallow meets yellow swallow, and all that is left is a single yellow feather, floating to the floor as the cat licks her paws and face clean. Banks, upon discovering his small friend gone, writes a regretful obituary in his journal. He was hearty and in high health, so that probably he might have lived a great while longer had fate been more kind. As the Endeavour pushes further south, leaving behind the latitudes where the trade winds blow and now heading to tropical torpor, the pace slows, the mercury rises in keeping with the humidity, and the steamy heat is interrupted only by regular squalls. I can liken it to nothing so much as April in England, observes Mr. Banks, when it is very showery. The weather is never certain for 2 hours. At least, for Mr. Banks and Dr. Solander, the calms when they come are so calm that they are regularly able to go out in their small boat, bob about the Endeavour, and haul in whatever fish they can, before taking them back to the great cabin, where the real work begins. First the fish are measured, before being described in detail with commonalities noted and entered into the books. A fish was taken, which was described and called Scomber serpens, even as Sidney Parkinson and Herman Sporing set about drawing them. Now they are dried, labelled and stored in specimen jars, in a bid to preserve them, before most are stowed away. Others, however, if not of specific interest, are claimed by hungry sailors, cooked and wolfed down. On one such calm day in October, Joseph Banks takes in a haul of what the sailors tell him is called a Portuguese man-of-war, or what Linnaeus has called Holothuria physalis. Banks can barely believe his eyes. The Holothuria proved to be one of the most beautiful sights I'd ever seen, It consisted of a small bladder, in shape much like the air bladder of fishes, from the bottom of which descended a number of strings of bright blue and red, some 3 or 4 feet in length, which if touched stung the person who touched them in the same manner as nettles, only much stronger. On the top of this bladder was a membrane, which he turned either one way or the other as the wind blew to receive it. This was veined with pink in an uncommonly beautiful manner. It's all so exhilarating. While that first summer collecting samples back at Revesby Abbey had been invigorating, when everything sparkled with the magic of newness and discovery, this is something else again, with everyone having a real sense of being right on the frontiers of science. Where they go, what they do, the frontiers are being pushed outwards, ever outwards. And still the air becomes heavier and hotter as the Endeavour pushes south. The salty damp not only leaves its mark on the men, who display a listless laziness that never quite leaves them, but on the ship too, rusting every skerrick of iron that is exposed to the air. The knives in people's pockets become almost useless, and the razors in cases not free. As torpor threatens, Captain Cook is as vigilant as ever in ensuring his people keep to the correct diet. He does not accept men being late to their watches, or swearing, or even looking anything other than spick, span, and shipshape at all times. Repair that tear, sew that button. All men are supplied with thread, needles, and buttons, and are expected to present well. So too must their hands be kept clean, and it is a regular occurrence for the men to line up on deck and place their hands palms up and then palms down before their captain, so he can ensure that nails are cut and fingers are not covered in muck. Cook firmly believes that while cleanliness is next to godliness, it is also very close to health, and by insisting on that cleanliness, he is reducing the chances of them developing scurvy or other diseases. All those found to be not up to the mark on cleanliness have their daily allowance of grog cut, a very easy way to gather their full attention. Pass the soap, and open the portals. Captain Cook is of the view that there are few problems of health that fresh air can't help, and he insists that the latticed gratings found on every deck be left uncovered at all times, unless waves are bursting over the sides and the men risk being drenched, just as he prefers the Endeavour's ventilation ports to be kept open in calm weather. Cook also orders everything to be swabbed with vinegar, a powerful tool for a captain who takes cleanliness seriously, and has the armourers work twice as hard as usual on keeping the guns functional, and that's just the rust. For who could forget the problem of mould? Cook orders the hammocks be brought up to deck daily, twice daily if possible, to be bared and aired. Of course, as is the way of these things, the people most affected are those with the most effects. Mr. Banks records, "Still the damper everything grew, this was perceivable even to the human body, and very much so, but more remarkably upon all kinds of furniture. All kinds of leather became mouldy. Portfolios and trunks covered with black leather were almost white. Soon after this, mould adhered to almost everything. All the books in my library became mouldy, so that they were obliged to be wiped to preserve them." 25th of October, 1768, the Equator. 0 degrees of latitude, but latitude for some. The hot dampness on board need not dampen the sailors' spirits on this sultry afternoon. Old salts, who've done this many times before, know the Endeavour is close to the invisible line known as the Equator. For together with the hot weather come other telltale signs, such as pronounced calms, being followed shortly thereafter with vicious squalls. Like a cranky, flustered dowager, not happy with the servants when she does awake, the weather stirs only to snarl, and then goes back to sleep. The most savvy sailors of all know that the key sign is in the heavens, where the sun has moved ever closer to being directly overhead, even as the night sky is presenting constellations many of the young ones have never seen before. while Earth's closest planetary neighbour, Venus, known as the evening star, or the morning star depending on its time of rising and setting, is also rising higher in the sky. And today it happens, the moment that those who have sailed over the zero parallel before have been waiting for. From his position on the quarter-deck, Captain Cook puts down his sextant and dip circle, which he had been using to measure, to shoot the sun, and gives them the cherished word around 8 a.m. Right now, they are actually crossing the equator. Yes, as it is Captain Cook doing the calculations and the shooting of the sun, it is even more precise than that, as they haven't crossed the equator per se, so much as the equinoctial line. A wave of excitement moves through the ship as an ancient and cherished tradition, acknowledged by all seafaring nations, gets underway. Known as the equatorial baptism, it will see nearly all those crossing the line for the first time paying their respects to the Lord of the Seas, King Neptune, to gain his acceptance and be initiated into his court. An important part of the age-old rite of passage is that the whole affair is under the command of the sailors and junior officers, and not the captain, though they will need his permission, of course. Sure enough, as the buzz moves around the ship while the captain and gentlemen are enjoying their midday meal, as ever, Cook is at the head of the table, and there, in the middle of the table, taking pride of place, sits the dressed sauerkraut. Cook's clerk, Richard Orton, brings to him a list of every living being on the ship. It includes dogs and cats, and affixed to the list is a petition signed the ship's company, desiring leave to examine everybody in that list, that it might be known whether or not they had crossed the line before. And no, of course Captain Cook will not suffer the indignity of being dunked in the ocean, even though it is his first time. But for the privilege of remaining dry with those on the blacklist, he must hand over a bottle of rum. Cook says for the ship's company to enjoy it, which is why the buzz is even stronger now, as the men guzzle their tankards. When it comes to you, Joseph Banks, as you also wish your entire retinue to be spared, including your dogs, the penalty will be much stronger, as in your case we will take many bottles of brandy and 1 bottle of rum for each of your 2 dogs. "Permission is granted," Captain Cook says to his clerk, with a rare, wry smile. It's on. With no little glee, one of the midshipmen is soon tramping through the cramped, damp corridors of the lower decks, calling out for all ship's company to assemble on the quarter-deck. There's a stampede of sailors' feet along the wooden decks and up the ladders to the deck where, for some, a surprise awaits. The brandy, Mr. Banks sees, is already being handed out, and things appear set to get merrier still. By traditional maritime law, it is the right of all those who have crossed the line before, the shellbacks as they are known, to perform a dunking of all those griffins who are doing it for the first time. Boatswain John Gathray is the commanding lieutenant of this ritual, and so steps forward blowing his whistle for attention. Now the lieutenant calls out the names and asks the men to provide proof that they have previously crossed the line, and if not, to confess it now. Suddenly a breakthrough. The 16-year-old Isaac Smith, the cousin of Captain Cook's wife, confesses that this is his first time. A roar goes up. Now, if Isaac chooses, he can escape the dunking by giving up 4 days of his allowance of wine and having it handed out to the others right now. But no, he's not willing to do that, so must pay the price. A rope has already been put through a pulley secured to the main yard on high and out over the ocean, with one end of the rope now in the hands of some of the strongest of the crew. The other end of the rope has 3 cross struts of wood tied into it, each about a yard apart. Now Isaac loops his legs over the bottom strut and is securely tied onto it, while he can hold the second strut for stability. The third strut is above his head and is simply there so that when we haul him up, he can't come flying out and hit his head on the pulley. Once all is ready, the air of delicious expectation reaches its near climax as the boatswain, Lieutenant Gathray, blows his whistle again, and Isaac is immediately hauled as high as the highest crosspiece allows. And now they let the rope go, as he in turn roars down to the ocean with a massive splash, and the cheer of the crew crowding the quarterdeck goes up. 3 times the process is repeated before, now inducted, he is hauled up once more, and a cross rope brings him back to the deck, all gasps and splutters, with the water still pouring off him. Welcome to the court of King Neptune. Next, let us go to the youngest marine on board, for even His Majesty's Marines must take part in the sailors' ritual and bow to King Neptune, that painfully shy and sensitive young fellow William Greenslade. Of the Marines, he is the least swaggering, the least verbose, far and away the least inclined to even imply he has any authority over the sailors. To the sailors he appears to be just a simple soul, and a silent simple soul at that, something that has occasionally earned him the rancour of his barking Marine commander, Sergeant John Edgecombe, who is forever goading the young man, trying to toughen him, to make a man out of him, so he can be a swaggering Marine, just like them. But it has simply had no effect on the young fellow. He is as silent and just as quivering as ever he was. Right now, that natural quiver turns to outright trembling, as his name is called out by Lieutenant Gathray, and he makes a hesitant step forward. And another. And one more, until he has the ropes put around him, at which point, as the mob roars, he is strung up high in the air, now shaking with fear as he awaits the drop. And there he goes, with a satisfying splash, as the cry goes up, the rum goes down, and morale lifts even further. William Greenslade emerges, gasping for air, but at least momentarily glad to be fully immersed with the ship's company, not just the odd one out. The well-born gentleman from the American colonies, Midshipman James Margre, knocks back the rum with the best of them, and is just one of the many roaring in this matey and macabre ritual. It is typical of him to be right in the middle of it, a popular figure among the sailors for his worldliness, and among the midshipmen for his sheer intelligence. Despite having been the one to hand Captain Cook the list, it is equally typical of Richard Orton to decline to have anything to do with the event itself. Yes, he wants to drink, but he doesn't need to put himself in the middle of this mob to do it. He is the clerk to the captain, don't you know, and is ever and always a man apart. And so it goes. 20 more times the process is repeated as the drinking and dunking goes on. One after another of the sailors emerging from the sea, mostly grinning and shaking their heads vigorously to shed the water, their long ponytails flying about like wet whips, with the whole thing finishing just as night falls. Sufficiently diverting it certainly was, Mr. Banks chronicles, to see the different faces that were made on this occasion, some grinning and exulting in their hardiness, whilst others were almost suffocated, and came up ready enough to have compounded after the first or second duck, had such proceeding been allowable. Captain Cook watches on, the slightly upturned corners of his mouth belying his amusement, though he declines the brandy bottle as it passes by. He is a man of moderation, especially when in view of his men, but that's not to say he doesn't enjoy the spectacle, and climbing back through the hatchway, down to the great cabin, he lets a broad smile blossom on his face. But back to work, chronicling their journey. We crossed the line in the longitude of 29 degrees 29 minutes west from Greenwich. We also tried the dipping needle belonging to the Royal Society, and found the north point to dip 26 degrees below the horizon. 29th of October, 1768. South of the equator. Flashes of light to break the night. Oh, the sheer pleasure of it. Certainly seafaring can have its challenges, but on a night like tonight, as the Endeavour sails serenely through her aquatic realm, the moonbeams shining brightly upon the delightful phosphorescence in her wake, Banks has reason to wax lyrical in his journal. This evening the sea appeared uncommonly beautiful, flashes of light coming from it perfectly resembling small flashes of lightning, and these so frequent that sometimes 8 or 10 were visible at the same moment. Ever and always scientifically curious, Banks and his cohort asked the seamen the cause of this extraordinary light show, only to find them divided. They are seafarers, not scientists, and have long accepted the things they see and experience the way a dog accepts its tail. That is just the way it is, the way it has always been, and the way it always will be. But yes, seeing as you scientific gentlemen ask, there have long been stories about what causes it. Fish make the light by agitating the salt water when darting at their prey, one sailor offers an answer. Mr. Banks likes the theory, which encourages another sailor to add, "We often seen them, and knew them to be nothing but medusas, a kind of jellyfish." Banks, of course, is eager to get to the bottom of it, to find the scientific answer rather than mere stories, and sets about at least catching some of the medusas to test the theory, and within a short while, by casting his net, has indeed brought some of the creatures on board. They proved, Banks records carefully, advancing the frontiers of science just a few inches, to be a species of medusa which, when brought on board, appeared like metal, violently heated, emitting a white light. 6th of November, 1768. Far western Atlantic Ocean. We go to Rio. Having now crossed most of the Atlantic Ocean, Captain Cook takes stock, only to find those stocks are starting to run quite low, and they are in need of water, fresh meat and vegetables, and other stores. Yes, they could last a few more weeks without getting fresh supplies, and likely make it to their next port of call at Porto Alegre, or further south at the Falkland Islands. But, ever careful, ensuring themselves against unforeseen circumstances, he decides to call in at the Portuguese port of Rio de Janeiro, where, "From the reception former ships had met with here, I doubted not but we should be well received." Very well, then. By now the men of the Endeavour understand things better. If Captain Cook has no doubts, all should be smooth sailing. They will go to Rio de Janeiro. 13th of November, 1768, Rio de Janeiro, harbouring suspicions. Finally, nearly 3 months after leaving England, the sailors on the Endeavour spot finch-like birds with flashing wings gliding majestically over the waters to them, a sure indication that they are close to land. And on the 12th of November they spot Cape Frio, and the high and mountainous silhouette of South America's eastern coastline. It's the Portuguese colony of Brazil. After a few days sailing south by west, marvelling at the brilliant, impossibly white sandy beaches off their starboard, "The whitest colour I ever saw," records Banks, Captain Cook spots the rocky islands that sit just off the heads of a fine, well-protected harbour, on the banks of which lies the famed city of Rio de Janeiro. For now, those sailors not on watch gravitate towards the bow of the Endeavour as it blow-bobs forward on a light breeze at their southeast, through the narrow entrance, gazing closely at these stone fortifications that sit atop each rocky headland, the northern side sporting the largest fort known as Santa Cruz, their cannon looking out over the sea like rusty iron sentinels, even as the gaping maws of the capacious harbour of Rio de Janeiro reach out to swallow the Endeavour whole. As they carefully sail past the several tiny islands dotted around the harbour, the men's attention is drawn west by a massive conical mountain, looming over 1/2 mile high and garbed in green, but for a flat brown bare top and steep cliffs on each side. Pó de Açúcar, the Portuguese call it, meaning sugar loaf, after the conical moulds made of clay made to transport sugar on ships. It towers over the whole bay, a brooding presence that says you have arrived in a strange land, where most things are out of all proportion to what you might have seen in other lands. Majestic vessels of classic Portuguese design pass by the Endeavour, filled with swarthy-looking sailors and merchants, gazing at them with a slightly menacing curiosity. At least it is good to have made port. With a nod from Captain Cook, Master Molyneux takes matters in hand, giving the orders that see the tars scampering every which way. "Shorten sail," and the Endeavour begins to slow as the sails are furled. "Head to wind," and the Endeavour actually comes to a halt as the wind falls from those sails. "Let go the anchor. Take in all sail." "Lieutenant Hicks," Captain Cook says, turning to his second lieutenant. "Yes, Captain?" "Take the pinnace ahead to the city and acquaint the Viceroy that we wish to procure water and other necessities." "Aye, aye," says Lieutenant Hicks, nodding in acknowledgement. "And desire the assistance of a pilot to bring us into proper anchoring ground," instructs Captain Cook. Protocol dictates that when entering a foreign harbour, one must gain permission from the presiding authority before anyone may go ashore, and sending a pilot is little more than a matter of the locals knowing the harbour better than any foreign commander could, and so lending a courteous hand. For a vessel of the British Royal Navy visiting the port of a friendly European country, this should be no more than a formality. Lieutenant Hicks is accompanied on this errand by Master's mate Charlie Clerk. As they leave, Captain Cook gives the order to drop the anchor. "Make the anchor ready for letting go," comes the cry, and nudges the Endeavour around to the northern side of a small island, Isla das Cobras, the Island of Cobras, atop which is the chief fortification that defends the town, to the calm bay right at the foot of the thriving colonial settlement. Cook is going through the list of things he hopes to buy in Rio, when he looks up from his work and is shocked to see the pinnace returning to the ship without the familiar figure of Lieutenant Hicks standing sternly at the stern. Where is he? The answer is provided by the rather shocked coxswain, next to whom stands a Portuguese subaltern, bristling with disdainful officiousness. "The lieutenant is detained on shore," the coxswain calls up for all the ship's company to hear. No sooner had they landed, he reports, and gone to Rio's customs house, Alfandega, to present their papers, than Lieutenant Hicks and the petty officer had been led off by Portuguese soldiers on the direct orders of the Viceroy, His Excellency Dom Antonio Rolem de Moura Tavares, the leading Portuguese official in this colony, a man of keen eye and deeply forbidding aspect. Hicks will remain detained until Captain Cook turns up in person to claim him. What? Cook's second-in-command, the strong and able young Hicks, a lieutenant in His Majesty's Navy, has been frog-marched off somewhere at the orders of this impertinent Viceroy? Cook admires Hicks, a solid sailor who has risen through the ranks on the back of his vigour and intelligence alone. The captain knows that Lieutenant Hicks will be livid to be so mistreated by Portuguese officials, but is thankful that he is also proven to be quick-witted and prudent in an emergency. Cook can picture it now, Lieutenant Hicks's face puckered, his lips pursed in stern frustration, but holding himself in. Frankly, there is no better representative from the Endeavour to be detained like this. He isn't alone either. The dependable Charlie Clerk has also been confined. Two of his best men, well, at least the two will surely put up a diplomatic but forceful front. Captain Cook seethes at this particular affront and gets a hurry on. This is outrageous, and after the anchor is finally dropped, he is about to ready himself to go ashore when— Hello, what's this? Coming from the shore towards them is a Portuguese 10-oared vessel bearing 14 armed soldiers, all bristling bayonets and menacing machismo, who have no sooner reached the English vessel than they row around it, clearly getting a good look so they can report back. First Cook and now Banks hail them from the deck of the Endeavour, politely inquiring, "What is your business?" "We have orders from His Excellency to permit nobody from this ship to go on shore but the Capateo, and to hinder anyone from coming on board your ship unless they have particular leave to do so." Cook makes further inquiries. There is no reply, bar glowering glares. Joseph Banks, an English gentleman whose opinion has always mattered, has never been so blatantly ignored in his entire life. He stands exasperated, watching the indifferent Portuguese row defiantly in the water below. Another boat now arrives, bearing an officious-looking Portuguese colonel, who informs Captain Cook, in a tone which makes clear that he is demanding, not asking, that he wishes to come aboard. Captain Cook obliges. As soon as they are on deck, the questions start. Many and varied particular questions, Cook records, all of which he answers in typical fashion. with the utmost candour and precision. The senior officer then assures Cook, "Your lieutenant has not been confined. He has been detained. It is our constant custom to detain anyone who comes ashore from a ship until a boat from His Excellency has visited the ship. Your officer will be sent on board as soon as I go back on shore." Captain Cook is so shocked he can only think there must be some kind of mistake. Surely. The alternative is unthinkable. For the moment, the important thing is to retain his diplomatic demeanour, and so he wishes them well on their way as they climb back down the ladder to their boat and make for shore. Still, as Captain Cook watches them row away, his thick brows are knitted with concern. Something is not right. On shore, in custody, Lieutenant Hicks continues to make no headway with the Viceroy, a man who considers himself just one down from the King in Portugal. But here in Brazil, he is king, and don't you forget it, Lieutenant Hicks. Yes, a pompous, officious man of high noble birth, the Viceroy is in no doubt that his own importance is only matched by the lack of importance of his interlocutor, and it is in vain for Hicks to insist that they really are on an expedition of science. For His Excellency, Sua Excellencia, the Governo, snorts unpleasantly. He has heard many tales in his 6 decades, but this one is among the most preposterous. As if Os Bretos would send a ship of the Royal Navy with 100 men aboard, including some gentlemen civilian scientists, just to go and look at the sun? Ludicrous. The Viceroy will not be so easily fooled. Why, take a look at the ship itself. Is that a standard vessel of His British Majesty? Of course not, insists the Viceroy. Who has ever seen a ship like that? There is something off, something different about this suspicious vessel bobbing about in the Brazilian Bay. And I don't much like the look of the crew either. In the words of Lieutenant John Gore, once those on the Endeavour realise what this is all about, one suspicion of us, among many others, is that our ship is a trading spy, and that Mr. Banks and the Doctor are both supercargoes and engineers, and not naturalists. For the business of such being so very abstruse and unprofitable that they cannot believe gentlemen would come as far as Brazil on that account only. Exactly. Well, they have come up against the wrong man. But for now, you may go back to your ship, Lieutenant Hicks. Still aboard the ship, Joseph Banks is beside himself with rage. He has come all this way, risking his life and spending his fortune, to collect plants, and he is now forbidden by Portuguese sniff authorities to even land on their shores and take his greyhounds for much-needed walks, let alone explore for plants. It is unconscionable. Determined to sort out the mess himself, Captain Cook is quick to go on shore to try to explain to a highly sceptical Viceroy what exactly a transit of Venus is. It proves, however, to be tough going, for he certainly did not believe a word about our being bound to the southward to observe the transit of Venus, but looked upon it only as an invented story, to cover some other design we must be upon, for he could form no other idea about that phenomenon, after I had explained it to him, than the North Star passing through the South Pole. These were his own words. The Viceroy, in turn, struggles to explain to Captain Cook how things are going to be, but he means every word of it, regardless. Your so-called botanist, Senor Banks, will not be allowed on shore while in Rio, along with the rest of the so-called supernumeraries, and you, Capitao, will only be allowed when accompanied by our armed attendant for every step you take, including on your own boat when being ferried to shore, presented as a compliment, which Cook knows instantly means a portable jailer. Oh, and you may not buy your own provisions directly. You must employ a representative from the port town to buy the necessary things which will inevitably both slow everything down and make everything rise in price. What is not slow to rise is Cook's anger, which for once does not dissipate quickly. Not this time. Though he bites his tongue, his mind swirls. It is an outrage, a slight on my command, an insult to the Royal Navy and to Great Britain, How can I tamely submit to such a custom which, when practised in its full force, must bring disgrace to the British flag? On the other hand, I must resist entering into such disputes, seeing how much I am likely to be delayed and embarrassed in getting the supplies I want. What to do? What to do? After a number of days languishing under this tyranny of tedium by the Viceroy, and 2 further attempts to remonstrate, Captain Cook decides that enough is enough. I resolved, rather than be made a prisoner in my own boat, not to go any more ashore, unless I could do it without having a soldier put into the boat, as had hitherto been done. And thinking that the Viceroy might lay under some mistake, which on proper application might be cleared up. With that in mind, the ever-patient Cook takes a quill in hand and writes a long letter to the Viceroy, putting forth his whole case, which is fine for Captain Cook. Personally, Joseph Banks has lost all pretense of patience, and is beside himself as he gazes longingly at the fresh South American continent before him, the verdant hills behind Rio surely home to all manner of unknown vegetables, animals, and minerals just waiting to be discovered by him. Oh yes, the locals likely know all the various species and types, and even have names for them. But this is different. If Banks can just get his hands on them, he will be bringing a scientific eye to them for the first time, and that is what truly counts. For 4 days, it has been a torture to be denied permission to land, to get amongst it, and so now the botanist decides to take matters into his own hands. Yes, it is time to tell the Viceroy just who he is dealing with. A gentleman of great pedigree just like him. Taking his own quill in hand, thus, the botanist begs to bring it to the Viceroy's attention. Disagreeable as it is for any man to declare his own rank and consequence, my situation makes it necessary. I am a gentleman, and one of fortune sufficient to have at my own expense fitted out that part of this expedition under my direction, which is intended to examine the natural history of the countries where we shall touch. I ask, therefore, leave to go on shore, taking with me proper people who may assist me in collecting and examining such trees, shrubs, plants, birds, beasts, fishes, and insects as I may meet with. Captain Cook sends off both missives together, and it does not take long for the Viceroy to reply, writing back that very afternoon with a terse few sentences for them both. No to you, Capitao, and your so-called naturalist gentlemen on board. He adds, as Cook relays to his fellow officers with a rare, wry scoff, that if I think it hard submitting to the customs of this port, I may leave it when I please. In other words, take your strangely built and unusually fitted-out British ship with your nefarious purposes, your ludicrous stories of mapping the stars across the sun from some speck of land in the Pacific, and become someone else's problem, for we will not help you. Captain Cook is exasperated. Joseph Banks, Esquire, is furious. And thus, a paper war commenced between me and His Excellency, Cook records, wherein I had no other advantage than the racking of his invention to find reasons for treating us in the manner he did, for he never would relax the least from any one point. The next day, Cook decides it is time to force the issue, so he sends an understandably nervous Lieutenant Hicks to the shore once more, with a letter from his captain, backed by the full weight of Cook's commission from King George III, proffered for His Excellency's approval and intimidation. In his grand viceregal residence, positioned at right angles to a great square skirting the beach off which the Endeavour is anchored, His Excellency Don Antonio Rolim de Maura Tavares is impressed with this English Capitao's sheer tenacity, as seemingly every knock on the door brings another insistent missive, like now. For again comes the anxious knock, as if its lightness might somehow lessen the unwelcome intrusion. "Visi rei," breathes a timid servant. "Si?" Another letter from the troublesome Endeavour captain, Viceroy. He is now refusing to have a man guard him, or any of his men. The Viceroy is unmoved. "No. And tell the Senior Lieutenant he will only be allowed back to your ship if he is accompanied by guarda português, a Portuguese guard." The servant passes on the message to the waiting Lieutenant Hicks. "I refuse," Hicks replies. "Very well. Then you are under arrest, as are all of your crew." Beside himself with fury when he hears the latest news, Cook sends one of his petty officers on shore, with another letter insisting that Lieutenant Hicks, the crew and the pinnace be released immediately, and demanding the reason for their detention in the first place. "Viceroy," interrupts the timid servant once more. This time at least the Viceroy allows the petty officer to return to the Endeavour without being arrested, albeit with his ears still ringing from the Viceroy's verbal salvo fired right at him. Climbing up the steps to the deck, the petty officer makes his way past all the sailors, hammering, sawing, sewing sails and caulking seams, getting the ship ready for what will hopefully be departure soon, but who knows, and reports directly to Captain Cook. The Viceroy is not happy. Lieutenant Hicks and the men are still on shore under arrest, and for more formal communication from the Viceroy, an answer will be sent tomorrow. It is a dark and stormy night. After the troubling events of the day, shipboard life has continued as before regardless, with the sounds of industry ceasing at sundown as ever, and after their evening meal most of the men taking their daily allowance of grog, 1 gallon, before retiring to their hammocks. But there will be little sleep for Captain Cook. What troubles him is not merely the Viceroy's venality, nor even the unfairness of it. Just this afternoon he has seen a Spanish ship come into harbour and be received with courtesy. Yes, the Spanish. Can you imagine? The Spanish, the natural enemy of the Portuguese, are being given permissions not granted to us English. No, far more troubling is just how stormy the weather is. Dangerously stormy. After midnight the wind from the south becomes so violent that the ship is tossed about while at anchor, and even hit by big harbour waves, one so big that it carries away Banks's small boat, which had been tethered to the stern of a longboat, the latter holding a precious cargo of 4 pipes of rum. It means that the following morning, 20th of November, Captain Cook must send Master's Mate Charlie Clerk with a note to the Viceroy rather different from the one he was intending. Viceroy, we need your help. Specifically, the English captain now desires leave and the assistance of a shore boat to look after her. For once, there is cooperation from the Viceroy. Orders are given, and by the end of the day the longboat has been retrieved from the shore upon which it has washed up and returned to the Endeavour with the rum still inside. If that is not miracle enough, so too are Lieutenant Hicks, his boat crew, and their pinnace brought back to the Endeavour. Could it be that the Viceroy is sending them a message? Anything, if you will, just go. No. For the following morning comes another missive from the Viceroy, this time putting forward his view that the Endeavour is a smuggling vessel. For what else could explain its unusual capacious build, which has so bothered him from the start? She is simply made up to look like a British ship. Yes, Capitao Cook has a convincing commission, but many smugglers are convincing forgers. The Viceroy will not be fooled by a piece of paper, a cock-and-bull story about watching Venus, or a navy ship full of uppity gentlemen sent to collect ferns. Pull the other one, English. Joseph Banks reads the latest missive incredulously. The Viceroy's answer to the captain's last memorial came on board in which the captain is accused of smuggling, which made us all angry, but our venting our spleen against the Viceroy will be of little service to us. But seriously, Cook as the pirate captain of a league of smugglers, with Banks the head of his band of brigands? There are so many levels of absurdity to this that it is hard to keep track. Meanwhile, James Cook does the best he can to have men on shore procure the provisions he requires to get out of this port as fast as he can. 26th of November, 1768. Rio de Janeiro. Botany bandits commit leafy larceny.
This ends CD 5. CD 6.
Joseph Banks, meanwhile, has come to fancy the Viceroy's idea. Joseph Banks, Esquire, the leader of a band of brigands. It has a certain something to it. That is why, before dawn the next morning, he smuggles his black servants to shore on the reckoning they will blend in best with the locals, some 2/3 of whom are black. By the time the sun is shining brightly that morning, the men are collecting plants and insects on the outskirts of the city, working towards Mr. Banks's goal, even as Captain Cook, entirely unaware of the botanist's antics, is exasperated to receive yet another missive accusing him and his men of smuggling. Deeply frustrated now, he records in his journal that the Viceroy still keeps up his doubts that she is not a king's ship, and accuseth my people of smuggling, a thing I am very certain they were not guilty of, and for which His Excellency could produce no proof. And even as the good captain denies it outright, Banks sends his servants ashore again the next morning. So bountiful had their collection been the previous day, to his utter delight, even as he maintains that the very idea that he and his men would engage in something illegal like smuggling, sneaking about, no doubt under the cover of darkness, is preposterous. Sneaking about under the cover of darkness, it is time for Joseph Banks to earn his pirate's equivalent of stripes, and by stealth and by wealth go ashore illegally himself. It is midnight when he, Dr. Solander, Sidney Parkinson, and these servants climb out of the great cabin window, slip down the rope that drops them into their own little boat that waits below, and let the current carry them away from the ship before rowing softly. Softly, I said, no more of even the tiniest of splashes, to an unfrequented part of the shore, where they land and begin their excursion up into the country. Madness? Risking your life and liberty for some pedestrian plant fetching? Risking the entire voyage and the reputation of Captain Cook? Yes, but also pure Joseph Banks. A lark, a jape. In this case, it is in the service of science. The only thing that could make it better would be if it somehow involved bedding a woman, but for the moment this will do. A wonderful time ensues. Meeting with some of the inhabitants, they are delighted to be well received, even going into their houses, then head into the countryside, which positively abounded with a vast variety of plants and animals. Most important to Banks is that these specimens are nearly all unknown, and at the very least undocumented, he notes, because so few naturalists have had an opportunity of coming here. Indeed, no one that I know of, even tolerably curious, has been here since Margrave and Piso, about the year 1640. And yes, of course, everything they see is already well known to the local Indians, the generic term, together with natives, applied by most of the British to non-Europeans in foreign parts, and has been known for millennia as well as the qualities thereof. Perhaps they have even written some of the names and the qualities, who knows? What counts to Banks is that none of that knowledge has yet been effectively colonized by his own scientific world, meaning he and his entourage may do the honours themselves. Yes, it is all fresh for them to gather, examine, catalogue, give names to, and put their own English stamp upon. Such joy! Well after darkness has settled in, Joseph Banks, Dr. Solander, and the rest steal back to the boat on the shore to smuggle themselves and their bursting collection back to the Endeavour. Quill in hand, Cook fires off his latest salvo in the paper war, responding to the renewed allegation that he and his men might actually be a band of smugglers. If my commission should be counterfeited, it follows, of course, that every other officer's commissions and warrants are counterfeits, that all other papers in the ship tending to the same end are counterfeits, that the officers' and marines' uniforms are counterfeited, and lastly, the letters of credit I brought with me from Madeira are counterfeits. Was this true, Your Excellency must agree with me in declaring it to be the most strange, the most daring, and the most public piece of forgery that was ever committed in the whole world. Cook is exasperated. Banks is less, shocked. We heard it said in town, the botanist overhears the breathless petty officer telling Captain Cook that people were sent out in search of some of our people who were ashore without leave. Yes, well, The circumstances, Banks will record, made it necessary for us to go no more ashore while we stayed. Banks feels as though he has taken leave of his senses and walked into a daydream. Tropical plants abound in these climes, each one more fascinating than the last. From 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. every day, Banks and his men work on in the grand cabin, among other things retrieving each blossom, each leaf, and planting them upon pieces of unfixed blotting paper, which are then encased in more sheets before folding for preservation. Mr. Banks has already recorded the joy of such a scene with typical whimsy in his journal. Now do I wish that our friends in England could, by the assistance of some magical spying glass, take a peep at our situation. Dr. Solander sits at the cabin table describing, myself at my bureau journalizing. Between us hangs a large bunch of seaweed. Upon the table lays the wood and barnacles. They would see that, notwithstanding our different occupations, our lips move very often. In the meantime, as November draws to a close, the ongoing paper war of attrition, a clash of wills via a clash of quills, sees the pugnacious Viceroy tire first. If the only way Cook and his ship will leave is with full supplies, then so be it. The most important thing is that they leave him in peace. On December the 1st, the final supplies, a large quantity of fresh beef, greens, yams, and fresh fruit, including lemons, are brought aboard by the still glowering Portuguese soldiers, with Banks pleased to note, "This morn, thank God, we have got all we want from these illiterate, impolite gentry." Once more the Endeavour is a heaving hive of activity, seeming chaos to those who don't understand, but brilliantly regimented rituals to those who do. Yes, of course, smugglers creep away in the dead of night, but we are His Majesty's Royal Navy, and we take our leave in all guns blazing daylight, displaying pomp and precision, pluck and daring, and Lord no. Just as they are about to leave, one of the sailors, Peter Flower, loses his footing from high in the main shrouds and hits the water so hard it seems to knock him unconscious. He drowns before anyone can reach him. 2 ports, 2 men lost. And this last one, who had sailed with Captain Cook as far back as the Newfoundland days on the Grenville, hits the Yorkshireman particularly hard. "A good hardy seaman, and had sailed with me above 5 years," he sorrowfully records. By the time the drowned Flower is retrieved, sewn up in a canvas shroud and buried at sea, the wind has changed once more. And so they must sit out the day, before an ill wind, beneath a pall of gloom, and continue their face-off with the Viceroy's residence across the water. At least the calm gives Cook a chance to replace his lost sailor with a young Portuguese Jack, while also buying boxes and barrels of fresh supplies. At last, they are ready to go, ready to leave this infernal place. Chapter 5. Rounding Cape Horn. Consider the first hollow trunk of an oak, in which perhaps the shepherd could scarce venture to cross a brook swelled with a shower, enlarged at last into a ship of war, attacking fortresses, terrifying nations, setting storms and billows at defiance, and visiting the remotest parts of the globe. Samuel Johnson, The Rambler, 1750. Dawn, 5th of December, 1768. Rio, allaying the harbour of suspicions. At last the wind blows fair and true, away from Rio. It is with great relief that Captain Cook orders the Endeavour's anchor to be weighed, turns her stern to Rio, and moves towards the harbour's mouth. That feeling of freedom that comes to every born sailor when beckoned by the open sea is now upon him. In fact, however, from a distance of almost half a mile, a commandante of the Santa Cruz fort that guards the harbour from the eastern headland has the Endeavour locked squarely in his sights, and is making estimates as to range, wind direction, and speed of the English vessel. With some urgency now, the commandant, distinguished by the silver braid on both his black tricorn hat and the shoulders of his black coat, gives his orders, finishing with the order that those manning the particular 32-pounder cannon they've primed and aimed have all been waiting for. Fogo! Instantly, the officer commanding the gun crew brings a slowly burning piece of rope held in a special device which allows him to do it at arm's length and brings it quickly to the open vent connecting to the gunpowder. There is a fizz, a flash, and as all the Portuguese military men, including O Comandante, put their fingers in their ears, awaiting the explosion, aboard the Endeavour, the mood is light, the sea breeze fresh, and all is right with the world when off the larboard comes the unmistakable boom of a cannon. The roar of the big gun rolls over the Endeavour like a ball of dirty thunder at much the same time as the whizzing sound of the cannonball itself is heard, and an angry splash rises up, some 100 yards forward and off to starboard. First stupefied, then horrified, then infuriated, all in the space of a couple of seconds, Cook and company turn to see where the shot has come from. It is, of course, Fort Santa Cruz, which stands guard over the harbour entrance. No ship may enter or leave without coming under the sight of its guns. Still, Captain Cook does not waver. Steady as she goes, Mr. Hicks. We shall call their bluff. And now a second shot. This one goes straight over their mainmast and lands even closer to them. The message is clear. Turn back immediately or be blown out of the water. Steady as she goes? No. Now none is steady, and a steady course would merely present an easier target for Portuguese cannon that are puffing but surely not bluffing. How can this be? The same viceroy who has spent the best part of a week urging them to leave is now preventing their departure by cannonball? Dropping anchor, Cook sends a cutter 1 3/4 miles to the fort and is informed by O Comandante that he has no orders to allow the Endeavour to pass, and therefore the Endeavour neo passada. This surprised me not a little, Cook chronicles, as I had but this very morning received a very polite letter from the Viceroy, in answer to the one I had wrote some days ago, wherein he wishes me a good voyage. At 6 a.m., Cook pens and dispatches a final missive, causing a now familiar scene a few hours later. Viceroy? See? Another letter from Capitao James Cook. He wants to know when they can leave. This time the answer is surprising, and Master's Mate Charlie Clerk returns 3 hours later to the Endeavour with the news. You have His Excellency's apologies, Captain. As it happens, a letter was written by him several days ago, instructing O Comandante to let the Endeavour pass, but, as Cook will note after Clerk reports back, either by design or neglect, it had not been sent. At least that letter has firmly gone to the fort now, and the Endeavour is free to go, except, well, this is awkward. The wretched anchor proved to be stuck in the muck, somewhere between a rock and a hard place. For no matter how much the men strain on the capstan, it will not budge, and Cook is reduced to, Mr. Clerk, sending another note to an acidly amused viceroy, advising how the anchor got hold of a rock, where it held fast in spite of all our endeavours. The men heave, the men strain, the men groan as they exert every ounce of their combined power to shift the anchor. Well, nearly their combined power. Even as the men haul on the capstan, Mr. Banks and Dr. Solander charge around the deck with nets, capturing a fluttering, cluttering horde of beautiful butterflies that has suddenly descended upon them. From the balcony, looking out to the bay, the Viceroy is afforded one of the more absurd spectacles in his career, all seen through his telescope, as the grim-faced Cook oversees his sweating charges getting precisely nowhere, while all the while uppity botanist and his underling charge about on deck and up the rigging with their nets like giddy schoolchildren. His Excellency is moved to mirth, but nothing moves the anchor. As night falls, even Cook must bow to reality, and the efforts are stopped. They will have to wait another night in this accursed port before finally escaping the next day. But escape they finally do, though it is not until mid-afternoon the next day, thanks to a conspiracy of the tide, the wind, the collective cursing of the men, the roars from the officers, and the grace of Christ Almighty himself, that Providence at last dislodges the anchor from its rocky prison. 3 weeks and 2 days after arriving in this infernal place, the Endeavour is floating free once more. True, they all steel themselves as they once more pass by the Santa Cruz fortress on the eastern headland, but this time they are able to make their way to the open sea without incident. Cook feels a relief and a general lift in mood that not only extends into the night and all of the next day as they continue to push down the South American southeastern coast towards the dreaded Cape Horn, but in fact goes until Christmas, a rowdy day on board, as the mostly sober captain records of the ship's complement, being Christmas Day, the people were none of the soberest, and well into the new year, despite the shrieking gales that get ever stronger the further south they go. One particularly vicious gale, on the night of the 6th of January, 1769, is so violent that all of Mr. Banks's books and his bureau are knocked over, but that lifts the collective mood more than anything else. For beyond the quiet pleasure of seeing the blessed Banks brought low for once, what truly gladdens the sailors' hearts is how well the Endeavour, the humble Whitby cat, is able to handle the shattering battering without problem, something that surely bodes well for the trials to come, getting around Cape Horn, though there will be at least some respite on land before they must face it. Mid-January 1769. Bottom of the world. Less an ill wind than a chill wind. The more southerly the latitude, the more howling the winds, the bigger the waves, and the colder the temperature. Just a week into the new year, every tar is issued with a pair of thick trousers and a fear-naught jacket. Thick, tightly woven woolen jackets, familiar to all those, like James Cook himself, who have spent freezing winters in the North Sea off the English coast. The men are going to need them in the coming weeks as they attempt to round Cape Horn. For Joseph Banks and his entourage, of course, have no need, as the two servants simply retrieve from stowage the stylishly cut thick flannel jackets, waistcoats, and trousers that have been purchased for all of them, with no need of government issue, as if for them. And now, as the Endeavour continues to plough southwards, ever southwards, they can see out to starboard across the white-capped waves the towering white-capped mountains of Tierra del Fuego, the archipelago off the southern Patagonia tip of South America. Navigating closer to the coast, and within 3 leagues of the slate-strewn shoreline, Cook at last sees precisely what he's been looking for, the telltale signs of its native population. The reason Ferdinand Magellan, the 16th century Portuguese explorer, called the area the Land of Fire. "Saw some of the natives," Cook records in the log, "who made smoke in several places, which must have been done as a signal to us, as they did not continue it after we passed." On the 15th of January, 1769, Cook guides the Endeavour to anchor in 9 fathoms at the Bay of Good Success, just inside the Le Maire Strait, and which looks like a fine spot to wood and water. Gather the same, with wood for the stoves now being in particularly short supply, before attempting to get around the dreaded Cape Horn into the Pacific. It is an icy wind-blown place, but at least the anchorage is sheltered enough from the elements for Cook's men to have some respite. This is the very spot to dive deep into the eternal well of tasks that characterize the life of a sailor even in port, scrubbing the decks, mending the sails, airing the hammocks, and doing whatever else the officers order, singing sea shanties all the while. "All hands on board," our boatswain cries, his voice like thunder roaring. "All hands on board," his mates reply, before all sing together, "'Tis the signal for unmooring. Then your messenger bring to, heave your anchor to the bow, and we'll think on those girls when we're far, far away, and we'll think on those girls when we're far, far away." The sounds of their chanty sea shanty floats to Captain Cook over the waves as he is rowed to the shore, by half a dozen Marines, accompanied by the ever-restless Mr. Banks and Dr. Solander. And look there. Just as the pinnace approaches the rugged shore, a handful of Fuegan natives, all men, emerge from the forest, seemingly friendly. As the bow of the boat crunches onto the rocky beach, Cook disembarks first, and, wearing a broad smile, opens his hands wide to indicate that he is unarmed and comes in peace. The Fuegians clearly take him at his word, and gestures. For mere moments after Cook, Banks, the doctor, and the Marines have landed, they are tightly surrounded by some 30 or 40 natives, including women. They are a curious-looking bunch, with neatly made bows strung diagonally across their torsos, and their wild eyes peering out from horizontal stripes of black and red painted across their animated faces, and they seem to be all chattering rapidly in words that are completely unintelligible, although not Portuguese. Most of the words are rubbery and round, and sound as though they might bounce on a hard surface, although others, Mr. Banks notes, seem to express much as an Englishman when he hawks to clear his throat. Even while chattering madly, the natives gesture and prod at these strange white men dressed in strange, colourful garb. In response, Cook continues to smile and nod, while quietly ordering the Marines to do the same. In a situation like this, if things turn ugly, and it is always a chance, in a strange world, when you're outnumbered like this, no matter how many muskets you have, they will be perilously close to helpless to save themselves if the natives feel threatened and get their attack in first. And yet, mercifully, despite the growing numbers of natives and their poking, the mood doesn't change, and all remains friendly. Cook allows himself to get a closer look at the natives, to observe rather than to watch warily. There is no doubt they are a handsome-looking people. Their skin is a dark copper colour, and they are hard and muscled. No, they are nowhere near as big as the 9-foot-tall race of Patagonian giants that exists in the mind of credulous Londoners, but they are formidable-looking men, most of them bigger than the English visitors. Some of them appearing to be able to ward off the crippling cold simply by coating their bodies in oil they have extracted from animals and fish streaked across their skin. While the women wear a piece of skin over their privy parts, the men, as the battened-down, buttoned-up Cook records, observe no such decency. The less robust among them are wearing either llama or seal skins, draped loosely from their shoulders and hanging down to their knees, fur side out. Some of them, Cook notes, have in their possession European things such as rings, buttons, clothes, cloth, canvas, etc., which I think proves that they must sometimes travel to the northward, as we know of no ship that hath been in these parts for many years. Some of the native men bring their beads right up to his face, pointing and gesturing at them, saying over and over, "Nalika, Nalika," making Cook assume that is the native word for beads. For some reason they are entirely besotted with this simple curio, so much so that when Mr. Banks and the doctor start handing out beads and ribbons from a stash they have with them, the natives whoop with joy, particularly when one of a particular colour is produced. "They are extremely fond of any red thing," Cook observes in his log, "and seem to set more value on beads than anything we could give them. In this consists their whole pride. Few, either men or women, are without a necklace or string of beads made of small shells or bones about their necks." Indeed, while most colours abound in these parts, most particularly in their bird life, red is in rather short supply, and is the colour of peace, making it very highly valued. Soon enough comes further proof that the natives are familiar with the ways of Europeans when the man who appears to be their chief carefully points to Cook's pistol, before pointing his hand to a bird flying overhead and letting out a sound like a roar, followed by a squeal. At once all the natives around him start babbling, jumping up and down, and making the same gestures, pointing to the skies and making their best imitations of the sound of a shot. "Use your guns! Use your guns!" Perhaps a surprising thing for a people who historically have suffered because of such guns. The Portuguese had first colonized Brazil in 1532. But on the other hand, This part of the world had been judged as so cold and worthless they had declined to settle here, leaving it for the Onar, Yachan and Alakaloof Indians, the traditional owners. For James Cook, the key thing is that the natives are friendly. Joseph Banks beams to be here, and is like one suddenly let free from the botanical prison of Rio into this wilderness wonderland of Tierra del Fuego, with fresh delights in every direction. The young Englishman is determined to explore everything he can on his botanical odyssey to beat them all, in this geographical oddity like none he's ever seen, with lush ferns all around them here, standing in strict contrast to the snow they can see atop nearby hills. That snow, Banks is sure, must be left there from last winter in high enough citadels that it never melts. Alpine plants generally fascinate him, most particularly their capacity to flourish despite extremes of weather, and having already gathered and brought back to England alpine plants on a trip to Iceland, he is now, as he chronicles, eager to arrive at the Bear Rock mountain top, expecting there to find alpine plants of a country so curious. Most wonderfully, in terms of exploring this land and doing their botanizing, there will be no problem with the locals, as there had been in Rio. So it is that, while Cook intends to spend all of the 16th of January on shore, overseeing the replenishment of their wood and water supplies, he is not surprised when Mr. Banks rises very early and informs him that he will be taking his entourage with him to gather fresh plants and animals and sketch fresh landscapes. He does not ask Captain Cook's permission for such an exercise. On matters botanical, Banks is in charge. Not to forget Joseph Banks has spent £10,000 to outfit this voyage before it even left England, and James Cook is being paid by the Admiralty a mere, 5 of His Majesty's shillings a day, none of them shiny. It would be against nature, not to mention centuries of the English class structure, for Mr. Banks to seek the blessing of Captain Cook to go on such an expedition, and it does not occur to either man. So it is that when Captain Cook emerges on deck, he sees Banks in the cutter with his full retinue: Dr. Solander, Mr. Sporing, Mr. Green, Surgeon Monkhouse, Mr. Buchan to draw the sights, 2 seamen, and Banks's 4 servants to bag, cut, cook, fetch, and carry, heading to the shore in merry expectation. The devil-may-care dozen are due to return before dark. Banks's plan, as he will chronicle, is to try to penetrate into the country as far as we could, and if possible gain the tops of the hills where alone we saw places not overgrown with trees. They leave Cook's sight via a small sandy beach, and yet, when the jaunty crew try to follow rough paths through the thickets, it is to find, as the thickets get thicker and the paths disappear, their jauntiness disappears very quickly, particularly because they are always going uphill. Still they press on, the best they can, the branches tearing at their skin and their clothes, and by 3 p.m., after a solid 8 hours of pushing higher, it is not that they have got anywhere in particular, but at least, as the irrepressible Banks records, they have a near view of the places we intended to go. Yes, the men are generally tired, and yet Banks, bloody Banks, will he never slow down, is so full of enthusiasm and youth he is like a young pony, a show pony perhaps, who has learnt to gallop for the first time. Onwards! Not back to the, ship, Mr. Banks, before it starts to get too dark? No, onwards! Banks notes chirpily that the weather had all this time been vastly fine, much like a sunshiny day in May, so that neither heat nor cold was troublesome to us, nor were there any insects to molest us. They take time to shoot at birds, taking particular satisfaction in bringing down a vulture who had swooped too low on the possibility they might be lunch. The whole of the dead bird is trussed up and now strapped on the back of one of the servants, before they move on, at least the best they can. For in short order they are confronted by low bushes of birch, about reaching a man's middle, that are so thick and stubborn they refuse to bend to the will of men, instead forcing Banks and his men to bend to nature's will. It is painful, Painstaking progress, with every step a ritual of lifting your foot up and over a tangled thicket and then placing it down on unseen earth, where pungent mud slurps it whole, letting out a satisfied burp followed by a long squelch as you withdraw it again, to do the whole thing again. Even Banks must now concede that no travelling could possibly be worse than this, which still doesn't mean he is ready to turn back, however much the bloodshot rolling eyes of his men might plead for him to do so. Still they go for another mile, Banks, like a hound on the hunt, determined to determine what alpine plants manage to get such a foothold, and so thrive in this unique highland, where surely no other explorer, let alone another botanist, has been. Banks insists that our people, though rather fatigued, were yet in good spirits, so we pushed on intending to rest ourselves as soon as we should arrive at plain ground. After all, they are so close now to the peaks they have been struggling towards all day that it would be madness to turn back now, like swimming halfway to an island before giving up and turning back. Already his fingers are itching to pluck all kinds of exotic plants that are surely there. But what now? About 2/3 of the way through the birch barrier, before their very eyes, Mr. Buchan falls to the ground, rolls on his back and starts shaking, from his toe tips to the tip of his head. His eyes roll back, his jaw sags, and a thin, sickly stream of dribble rolls down his chin. An epileptic fit, known as the falling sickness. As they continue to stare, aghast, Buchan continues to writhe, his possessed body contorted into a grotesque tangle, like the birch underfoot, a white foam now spilling from between his twitching lips, small frightening gasps for air, or is it pain? Surgeon Monkhouse moves first, well, a quick sniff of snuff first. As a trained apothecary of vast experience, he knows that fits like this can quickly turn fatal unless prompt action is taken. A fire, men, and be quick about it. We must bring Buchan back from the brink, and some basic warmth should help. It is so urgent that even Mr. Banks himself is seen to help, as they all fan out, awkwardly forcing their way through the birch thicket and breaking off the driest twigs and branches they can find as they go. All the while Monkhouse clears a patch of tierra. Once the men return with their twigs and branches, they all huddle around as protection from the howling gale and light a fire for the patient, which flickers, nearly dies, and suddenly takes hold. Before long the poor fellow is laid close to the life-sustaining warmth, and seems to slowly come back to himself, to realize that most of the men are staring at him anxiously, while some are making ready to depart. Despite the fit, Mr. Banks insists on pushing on. All those who are most tired may remain behind, declares Banks magnanimously. Dr. Solander, Mr. Green, Surgeon Monkhouse, and myself will advance for the Alp. And how about near dead? Can I stay behind, too? The shattered Buchan, with 7 others, stays by the fire, while the rest of the Banks party heads off. The Lord Alps those who help themselves, and Banks and his men do just that when they arrive at the peaks in the late afternoon, helping themselves to whatever exotic alpine plants they can find. Banks loses himself in the novelty of collecting samples and specimens at the bottom of the world. There is, however, one slightly troubling distraction: the plummeting temperature, with the waning sun, even as the rising wind whistles with chilling menace. To make matters worse, it started to snow, quickly and with surprising ferocity. The air was here very cold, and we had frequent snow blasts, Banks will chronicle. Only now, with the rush of discovery past, does Banks realize their predicament. There's no chance they can get back to the safety of the ship before dark, and the best they can hope for is to descend far enough from these freezing altitudes that they can make the woods and build some kind of wigwam, just like the natives, which would keep them warm enough to get through the night. Certainly they cannot be as hardy as the Fuegian natives, and will pass a dreadful night. But the challenge right now is not to be comfortable, it is to live. Mr. Green and Surgeon Monkhouse are sent back forthwith to retrieve Buchan and the others from their spot in the thick of the thicket, while Banks, after pointing out the particular lower hill he desires them to rendezvous on, goes a different route, dropping into an adjacent valley, where the short birch appears less hostile. Alas, as the sun continues to wane, the cold waxes, creeping through their skin into their bones, sapping them and slowing them. By the time Monkhouse and Green have regathered the others and joined Banks at the rendezvous spot, it is 8 p.m., with only languishing light left to get through the rest of the birch to a place suitable to make camp. "Quickly now, men. I undertake to bring up the rear and see that no one is left behind," Banks declares, in a sudden, if belated, burst of concern for the welfare of his party. "No, really. And by the way, Mr. Buchan, how are you?" The answer, in Banks's assessment, is stronger than we could have expected, which is good. But Banks now also starts to realize that this full day of intense exertion, little food, high drama, higher altitude, and now intense bone-shattering cold, has made the rest of the men weaker than expected. And the first to falter is not Buchan at all, but Banks's most faithful companion of all, the good doctor. Yes, despite being a Swede, raised in such conditions, Daniel Solander is beyond battered by the conditions. "Banks, I cannot go any farther. I must lay down," he groans. "What? Lay down? Why, Dr. Solander, you of all people must understand stopping now in this manner is madness, as the ground is covered with snow, and will freeze you to the bone." The doctor doesn't care, or he can't care. A frozen soul has a frozen will, and whatever he might want to do, whatever might make sense, his legs simply buckle beneath him, and he slumps to the ground in a crumpled heap as the wind continues to howl and the snow blasts begin to cover him. Alarmingly, Dr. Solander is not the only one, for now Richmond, one of Banks's 2 black manservants, also makes clear that he wishes to stop. This, at least, is a little easier to deal with, as Banks orders him to keep going. Alas, even the English class system has its limits, and soon enough Richmond is disobedient enough to be much in the same way as the doctor. Annoyed, as this really is very inconvenient, and likely even dangerous, Banks sends 5 of the party forward to establish a camp and get a fire going, while he will stay behind with the laggards, bringing them on slowly. Who should lead the faster group? Ironically, it is none other than Mr. Buchan, who, braced by the night air and recovered from his fit, is the strongest among them, and leads them off down the valley. Now for Banks and the 4 reasonably fit men with him, the task is to coax the doctor and Richmond forward. But still Solander and Richmond lie in the snow, fallen snow angels that will soon become real angels on high if they do not get up and get moving. "Dr. Solander, I implore you, all you have to do is get up and finish crossing the birch. It is but half a mile, and then we shall be safe, and you will be warm." "Richmond, damn it, get up, get moving. If you stay here, you will surely freeze to death." Through a combination of honeyed persuasion and barked snark, Banks at last has both men on their feet and moving slowly, making it through the worst of the birch, until both men once again collapse in the snow. Banks cannot believe it. "Sir," says Richmond, "I cannot go any further." "If you do not, you must be froze to death," snaps Banks. "I will lie and die," says Richmond, with poetry that chills Banks more than the weather. Truly, this is madness. These men have lost not just the use of their limbs, but their whole reason. Banks then begs Dr. Solander to set an example, and to save his own life. "Get up, man." "I must sleep a little before I can go on," replies the doctor, as he nestles in a bed of snow that clearly risks being his deathbed. Unbelievable. But still he lies, in a frozen, perhaps deathly slumber, for all of 15 minutes. Banks, by his side, is lost in concern for his friend, until one of the seamen returns from the advance party to tell Banks in a weak voice, "A fire is lit about a quarter of a mile ahead, sir." "Solander, do you hear?" Banks shakes his dear friend awake. "Just a few 100 yards up ahead, there's a fire, and you can be saved. Wake up." With a groan, Solander ascends from the deep lair of Morpheus and stirs, and with great relief Banks lifts him to his feet. For his part, Richmond still refuses to budge, so Banks leaves the two men who seem least affected with cold to look after him. "I will send 2 to relieve you as soon as I reach the fire," he assures them. Half dragging, half carrying his friend, Banks keeps Solander staggering forward through the falling snow that's collecting quickly on the ground towards the faint glimmering of a fire, real or imagined, they can see up ahead. It is that flicker, that promise of warmth that keeps them going, through the sucking slush and brutal birch. At last, nearing 10 p.m., Banks drags Solander to the fire and sinks down gratefully to it himself. Just as soon as his pale fingers have enough feeling so that he can control them once more, Banks decides to open the bottle of rum they had brought with them, only to remember that, good Lord, he has left it in the knapsack of one of the two men left higher up. Slumping in disappointment, it is a good minute before he can gather himself to send 2 men back up the hill to rouse Richmond, aid the 2 men posted there, and bring them all back. And the rum, too, don't forget. Just 30 minutes later, those same 2 men return. "We've been all round the place," one of them says, "shouting and hallooing, but could not get any answer." Banks's worst fears start to crystallize. They are missing? They must have drunk immoderately and slept like Richmond, he thinks out loud, echoing the thoughts of all around the fire. Could they survive? After all, this is no nippy night that follows a sunshiny day in May, in England. This is full-blown snowstorm, high in the southern South American Alps, and the poor men will likely be completely covered come midnight, buried by the wee hours and frozen solid by morning. Nearing midnight, however, the howl of the wind brings with it the howl of a man, and it is with great joy that Banks and 4 of the men immediately go out to find him. There, it proves to be one of the seamen who'd been left with Richmond, his ice-covered form barely distinguishable in the hazy abyss, now half insensible with cold, and the other half insensible with alcohol. They had smelt him before they had seen him. The freezing rascal is led to the fire, and as the flames thaw him, Banks roars urgent questions at him. "Where are the others? Where lies Richmond? Can you find your way back? Can you direct those who might?" Through chattering teeth, the wretch gives answers enough that Banks himself, accompanied by 2 men, go out to find the lost men. Smashing through the snow, ascending and regularly yelling, they finally hear an answer from an unexpected source. For it is the voice of Richmond, and they soon find him. To Banks's amazement, though groggy, he can stand, which is something, though he cannot walk. As to the 3rd man, Dalton, he is alive, which, though something, is not much when he is prone on the ground, still and mute as stone. He will be his own frozen tombstone unless he rises. Banks returns to the fire. "All hands on deck. We need help." All together, then, they do their best to bring the men down. Alas, the snow is so thick and swirling, the wind so strong, the night so darkly pressing, and the path so impassable that for every 5 yards they descend, one or other of them falls badly, frequently resulting in injury. It is all they can do to find one another, let alone try to drag near corpses who are refusing to budge. It is impossible. Should they light a fire? If only they could. With a heavy heart and a kind of shocked disbelief that this can really be happening, the 25-year-old Joseph Banks realizes there is every chance that he is about to freeze to death, that his life is going to end within hours on this wretched mountain. In the meantime, they must look after those most at risk first, and he now instructs his men to lay boughs on the ground and put the 2 men on top so they have at least some insulation from the icy earth. And now they cover their friends with yet more boughs, saying silent prayers and begging for mercy upon these 2 wretches. And so they stumble about for half an hour, only wishing that they were numbed with cold, but in fact feeling it with every frozen fibre of their beings, as the snow just keeps swirling about them, dancing on their misery. Finally it is done, and thus we left them, hopeless of ever seeing them again alive. Stumbling on towards the fire, one of Banks's servants, Peter Briscoe, tells his master through chattering, shattering teeth that he feels strange, and indeed is soon hardly able to crawl. Still Banks stays with him, and onwards they push, Banks coaxing forth the last bit of energy the poor man has in him, to get him to the fire, as Briscoe is now almost dead with cold. To say the least, their situation is dire, as Banks will faithfully record in his journal. Now might our situation truly be called terrible. Of 12, our original number, 2 were already past all hopes. One more was so ill that, though he was with us, I had little hopes of his being able to walk in the morning, and another very likely to relapse into his fits, either before we set out or in the course of our journey. We were distant from the ship. We did not know how far. We knew only that we had been the greatest part of a day in walking it, through pathless woods. Provision we had none, but one vulture which had been shot while we were out, and at the shortest allowance could not furnish half a meal. And to complete our misfortunes we were caught in a snowstorm, in a climate we were utterly unacquainted. It had all happened so quickly. They had set out in fine weather simply to search for some alpine plants, and now here they are in the night, lost, and very close to dying in a snowstorm. After all, Banks defensively notes, it was very little after midsummer, and to experience such sudden, brutal change is a circumstance unheard of in Europe, for even in Norway or Lapland snow is never known to fall in the summer. Alas, Banks is all too aware now, but all he can do is snatch what sleep he can before finding out who lives at dawn. With that dawn, a slight lessening in the sheer blackness of the pounding whiteness that keeps going until Banks can see nothing but the earth covered with snow, as well as all the tops of the trees, nor were the snow squalls at all less frequent. We had no hopes now but of staying here as long as the snow lasted, and how long that would be God alone knew. At 6 a.m. the sun peeks through the squalls, the sole glimmer of light in the Stygian gloom, and we immediately thought of sending to see whether the poor wretches we had been so anxious about last night were yet alive. 3 of our people went, but soon returned, with the melancholy news of their being both dead. Yes, Banks's 2 black servants, Thomas Richmond and George Dalton, are dead. The boughs meant to save them will now act as their wooden tombs, cemented together only with the snow. Born in Jamaica after their parents had been forcibly taken from Africa, sold into slavery in England, die on a mountain in Brazil. At least the wind has stopped, and huddled together around the fire, the remaining 10 men can do nothing but wait. In the mid-morning, the snowfall eases. The sun manages to send small splinters through the thick clouds, and the breeze that has picked up makes the snow fall in clumps from atop the trees. A thaw, thinks Banks. There is even a stirring from the most ill of Banks' companions, Peter Briscoe, who after a while, though still extremely ill, his face a deadly grey, is able to declare, "I think myself able to walk. Thank Christ. Let us have breakfast to sustain us, and then make through the snow for the Endeavour." Irony of ironies, the only thing for breakfast is the vulture they had caught the previous day, when all was well, and the devil-may-care dozen was still whole. Yes, the near-dead will now eat the dead bird that had hoped to prey on their corpses. Oh, and those ancient superstitions about not eating the flesh of creatures that might have eaten human flesh, as they had had the luxury of doing with the shark Banks once served them. Those really were just silly superstitions. Indeed, the men salivate as the vulture is dressed by Banks's remaining servant and skinned and cut into 10 equal shares, every man cooking his own share, which furnished about 3 mouthfuls of hot meat. It is the first food they have had since a cold lunch yesterday, and all we were to expect till we should come to the ship. And if not, well then, the vultures will soon have their revenge served cold. The just deserts of the English for dessert. It is around 10 a.m. when Banks leads the party off and notes, as amazed as he is thrilled and relieved, that after a march of about 3 hours, we arrived at the beach, fortunate in having met with much better roads in our return than we did in going out, as well as in being nearer to the ship than we had had any reason to hope. Fortune at last has favoured the foolhardy. The ship! They can see the ship. The boat they had left here yesterday will be just here along the shore. Captain Cook, I can see them. It is a short while after noon, and Sidney Parkinson is one of many who has been looking out anxiously for the missing men since dawn. He is at last rewarded by the vision of them coming out of the thick forest and walking down towards the sandy beach. Infinitely relieved, Cook goes up on deck in time to see the cutter approaching, strangely looking a little thin in numbers. Yes, once they are aboard, he is apprised of the terrible news. 2 men have been lost, and their frozen corpses remain high on the mountain. Seriously saddened for them, and deeply disappointed for himself, the loss of every man under his command is a reflection on that command. Still, Cook also evinces another emotion in the immediate aftermath. He is shocked by the behaviour of one man, Joseph Banks. They all are. No, Cook makes no criticism of the results of the tragic expedition. No one could have predicted such freakish weather. But it is Banks's behaviour immediately after returning from a trip where 2 good men have been lost, and indeed Banks had become perilously close to losing his own life. As Master Molyneux notes incredulously in his private journal, as soon as they came on board, they refreshed themselves and were put into warm beds. The only exception was Banks, who, on hearing that they would soon be sailing away from this bay, after the briefest pause and with undiminished enthusiasm, began combing about the ship with his boat, dragging a fishing net. Yes, it is said that some aristocrats have ice water in their veins, that they are different from the common folk. But here is the embodiment. Deaths shatter Cook, while Banks pays little regard, regardless. His own survival simply means he is able to collect more flowers, plants, animals, birds, and fish, and he does not intend to waste a moment. His is a fierce fascination that bemuses Cook, and he simply does not understand how Banks can be so passionate for his collection. So much so that Cook observes in his journal that Banks's beloved gatherings are unknown in Europe, and in that alone consisted their whole value. When poor weather keeps the Endeavour at anchor for another day, Cook takes the time to complete his survey of the bay. But this man of the Royal Society simply takes his boat and his retinue ashore to search for more specimens, none of which are as exotic or as oft wild as the one they return with. Josephus Banksia, a unique species indeed. At last, on the 21st of January, the wind blows fair, and the Endeavour is able to head south once more, bound for that turbulent sea on the southern tip of this archipelago where the Atlantic, Pacific, and Southern Oceans fight a daily duel for supremacy that continues through the night, every night, and on into the next day. Cook and the old salts only know what to expect from what they have read in reports or heard at dock or around the mess table. Even the 7 men on board who circumnavigated the globe aboard the Dolphin, those with actual experience sailing in these wild southern latitudes, have not in fact rounded the Horn itself. Instead, they had gone through the Strait of Magellan, further to the north, named for the pioneering Portuguese captain who first navigated the route, and which is thought to be the easier of the 2 passages. And so, as Lieutenant Gore and that great yarn-spinner, Midshipman Charlie Clerk, and Master Robert Molyneux and the others tell them, though none of us have been south of the Cape, the Straits of Magellan were bad enough, and there are wild stories from those very few men who have been south of the Cape and lived to tell the tale. Let us tell you. Consequently, the rumours soon circulating among the lower decks are so compelling they are shared all over the ship, between swinging sailors high up in the riggings, tarrying tars down in the bilge, and even at the dining table of the gentlemen and officers in the great cabin. With Charlie Clerk at his best, the tall tales become taller still, nearly as tall as the Patagonian giants, and certainly ever more dire with every retelling as the men sail south. For you already know the heart of the matter. The waters off Cape Horn are the most infamous sailors' graveyard on the planet, born of the stormiest patch of sea on earth, with the most horrific gales and tempests, the most savagely unpredictable currents, and the biggest waves, some of which are monsters suddenly coming from unexpected directions. My friend, in those parts the winds are so wild they could blow a dog off a chain and a man from the mast unless he is lashed on. The same with the rain and the snow, so torrential and blizzard-like that they can sweep a man from the deck and into the ocean afore his mates know he's gone. And the currents, my God, the currents are so strong to the east, swirling around the Horn, that many a time, when we were with Captain Wallace, we would sail to the west for days on end, only to check our bearings and find that we had gone backwards as the currents and mountainous seas pushed the ship further to the east. Oh yes, those waves are sometimes higher than the mizzen-mast, and if just one of them hits you broadside, it is certain death for everyone on board within seconds. They can swallow you whole, and not even burp, and you head for Davy Jones's locker. And in those wild parts, south of the Horn, there are so many whales that, altogether, they near tipped Commodore Foulweather Jack Byron's ship over. Facing such obstacles, it had taken Byron just under 2 months to get through the strait. Wallace had an even harder time, taking 4 months to battle the contrary currents, winds and storms that hit during this mere 350-mile passage, not to mention losing his fellow ship the Swallow for the duration of the voyage. Yes, the ship's company of the Endeavour, from captain to gentleman to crew, have heard it all. It is for good reason the old sailing saying runs that below 40 degrees latitude there is no law, below 50 there is no God, and the tip of Cape Horn is thought to sit at 56 degrees south. For you see, feeding the apprehension even further is that Cook is under strict instruction to eschew the Strait of Magellan and go around Cape Horn itself, to keep as far south as possible, that is, in the unexplored part of the Pacific Ocean. Both Byron and Wallace had found it difficult to sail west from the Pacific exit of the strait against the prevailing westerlies, but by rounding the South American continent further south, tracking the coast southwest, descending to a latitude of roughly 60 degrees south, which is safely below the tip of Cape Horn, Cook's Endeavour will enter the Pacific at a more southerly latitude, and though he too will be sailing straight into the teeth of what are usually howling gales, he will be in an unexplored tract of the ocean, before tracking northwest to Tahiti. Ah yes, Tahiti. For when it comes to the mountainous seas to come, the greatest balms to the sailors' qualms are psalms to the palms of the island of their destination, and the beautiful bare-breasted women who wait beneath them. These are the women who want nothing more, I'm telling you, boys, than to lie with an English sailor. We just have to get through the trial that awaits. In preparation for it, in a manner that would have done Honey James proud all those years ago, hitting the books into the wee hours, Captain James Cook starts studying. In precisely the manner of his mentor, Captain Simcoe, who had shown him what a scientific captain's cabin could look like, he sits at the head of the table in the great cabin at every spare moment, surrounded by books and papers, poring over everything he can get his hands on. "As I have never been in those straits," he notes in his log, "I can only form my judgment on a careful comparison of the different ships' journals that have passed them, and those that have sailed around Cape Horn." Reading and rereading the journals and logs of Admiral George Anson, Foulweather Jack Byron, and Wallace, he also studies the translated accounts of the Dutch squadron commanded by Hermites, who sailed around the Horn in 1624. This is not simply an exercise in seamanship, but in intellect and knowledge, and as is typical of him, Cook intends to be no less than learned on the topic, before facing the actuality. In the meantime, as is also his wont and forte, he builds upon their works, roughly charting the coastlines as best he can without doing proper surveys, noting bays for safe anchorage, or water and wood, as they continue down the coast. The resultant charts he is coming up with are imperfect, but far better than existed heretofore. As Cook notes, it was the Vice-Admiral Chappenham, of the Dutch squadron, commanded by Hermites, who first discovered that the land of Cape Horn consisted of a number of islands, but the account they have given of those parts is very short and imperfect, and that of Schouten and Lemaire still worse, that it is no wonder that the charts hitherto published should be found incorrect. Even as they get closer to the turn to the west, Banks, the doctor, and their suite are every bit as busy as Cook, categorically categorizing the newly gathered specimens before stowing them away, ultimately to be taken all the way back to England. Everyone is busy, but no one more so than Banks, who flits between his personal work bureau and the big table where his people sit at every hour describing, classifying, and storing their finds from the Bay of Success. Every now and then, one of Banks's two greyhounds, who lie curled up under the table, opens a sleepy eye to check that its master is still in the room before the ship's rocking sends it to sleep again. On the 25th of January, after 4 days of surprisingly fast sailing on fair winds and relatively calm conditions out of the Bay of Success, Captain Cook is on the quarterdeck, enjoying a rare glimpse of clear skies, when he sees it. It is the infamous Cape itself. It appeared not unlike an island with a very high round hummock upon it. This I believe to be Cape Horn, for after we had stood about 3 leagues the weather cleared up for about a quarter of an hour, which gave us a sight of the land bearing west-southwest. But we could see no land to the southward or westward of it, and therefore conclude that it must be the Cape. As do so many of the sailors on deck who also see that round hummock, and spread the word, the Cape, the Cape, the Cape, we are close to it right now. The excitement is short-lived, however, replaced by another emotion, as fog rolls in on a fresh and fierce westerly wind, and for the first time they are exposed to swells that have come across an entire ocean, with no barrier of land to break them up or break them down, and boom! They are hit by one of the biggest waves since leaving England. And now another, and another still. Here we go, lads, here we go! The wind howls. The waves rise. The bow of the Endeavour starts climbing up and over huge swells before crashing down the other side. The sailors look at each other with weary, wary eyes as the walls of black icy water keep rolling towards them. With every crash over the Endeavour's bow, their own bowels loosen a little, and, if they're lucky, only salty spray blows into their faces. Unlucky, and there is so much water cascading over the deck, they can be knocked over and must tie ropes around their midriffs to make sure they are not swept away. And so the terror begins. Still, Captain Cook is in his element on the quarterdeck, confident of his mighty Whitby cat. As each wave hits the Endeavour, with the top of it often breaking over the ship's bow, there is a long shudder as she tries to shake it off, to settle herself for the next one. The shrieking westerly winds lift a shriek angrier still, hissing through the rigging and tearing at the sails, even as the skies darken and regularly unleash tempest. Had this been mankind's experience when he first went to sea, he would have stayed ashore. Above decks, the men of the Endeavour man their posts the best they can, a frozen band of brothers following the master's orders to tack ship out the main-topsails and the foretops, even as their mouths curse and their frozen fingers falter and fumble as they stand 40 feet above the swaying deck, trying to untie knots that have frozen stiff, and the very marrow of their souls turns to ice. Below decks they sleep in their violently swaying hammocks in the time before their next watch, or huddle around the fire in the galley as the boom of the waves on the bow and their sodden berths conspire to keep them awake most of the night. Onwards they go, ever further into this endless maelstrom of appalling weather. Those coming off their 4-hour watch bear a cold in them that will not cede no matter how close they huddle to the smoky fire. For the damp and cold has been seeping into everything. Their fellow sailors, their meals, the decks, their bunks and hammocks, their beings. What started as a sliver of a shiver in their souls has now frozen their entire being solid. And yet, just as the very morning star, that is the morning star, and it must cross Cook's mind that there it is, the morning star, the thing they are going to observe the eclipse of. Come the dawn, the blessed dawn, when they are up and moving once more, there is some reward for their punishment. For they can see it. It is a glorious view of the barren cape. Few mariners have seen it this close and lived to tell the tale, and they can at least take their place among the former. The challenge will be to avoid taking their place among the latter, too. But Captain Cook's main concern now is to help to tame the Cape for future mariners by recording its precise coordinates. So he and Mr. Green are on deck all morning, afternoon and into the night, taking as many observations as they can. The longitude of Cape Horn being deduced from no less than 24 observations, taken at no very great distance from the Cape, and on both sides of it, and when the sun was both to the east and west of the moon. For in this case the errors arising from the observations are most likely to correct one another. And onwards they sail, making 70-odd miles a day, on one day over 100 miles, a feat almost unheard of in these parts, where it is more common to have some days when you are blown backwards. It is the last day of January, and the Endeavour is only 10 days out from the Bay of Success, when Cook turns the ship towards the northwest. He is heading to the South Seas for the first time in his 40 years, those same seas depicted on the shilling he had taken from Mr. Sanderson's till as a lad. To the delight of Banks particularly, curious whales appear in ever greater abundance, as do myriad seals and penguins, even as enormous albatrosses with wingspans of up to 8 feet start to swirl about, emitting their curious call, a long, high-pitched bray interspersed with low, nasal grunts. So huge, so majestic, so many of them, gliding among the masts as they follow the ship's progress. Loading his musket with bird-shot, Banks manages, commendably without tearing holes in the sails, to bring a couple of the birds down on the deck and not in the sea. It is not long before Cook and the officers are dining on albatross, and eat heartily of it. So delicious, much tastier than vulture, Banks and the doctor concur, that many reach for this avian delicacy even when there is pork left on the table, proving that the desire for fresh meat trumps idle superstition. For those who might wonder, or even follow in their wake, Banks includes his recipe for a good albatross dinner. The way of dressing them is thus: skin them overnight, and soak their carcasses in salt water till morn. Then parboil them, and throw away the water, then stew them well with very little water, and when sufficiently tender, serve them up with savoury sauce. Onwards. By the 13th of February, once he is confirmed they are now advanced about 12 degrees to the westward of the Strait of Magellan, and 3.5 degrees to the northward of it, Cook can relax a little, and even feel a little pride in his ship, his men, and his achievement. What had taken Wallace 3 months had taken Cook's mighty Whitby cat just 33 days. Proud on the quarterdeck, he orders the men to continue the northwest course, straight through the Pacific Ocean to their destination, Tahiti. Late February to late March 1769, the Pacific Ocean. Melancholia. Oh, the mighty Pacific! How sweetly the sun shines, how blue is the ocean, how superb has the sailing been for nearly all of it since they had rounded Cape Horn and headed to the north-west, following a straight course. Day after day, Captain Cook delights in standing on the quarterdeck and looking out at the vast expanse stretching before him, a glittering, endless plain of vast blueness. The Pacific is pacified. Yes, the drinking water is growing stale, and the men yearn for a fresh piece of fruit, but at least they've been making headway in remarkably calm waters. Not until today, 26th of February, has the weather turned foul, but sure enough, here she comes as strong gales, squalls, and buckets of rain batter the Endeavour and its crew, who slish-slosh about the deck, forever swaying in the opposite way to the natural motion of the ship, and so riding it like a wild steed galloping along with the white horses of the wave-tops coming from all directions. Soon, however, the wind is so strong and not even the most experienced sailors can stay erect. "Close reef the main topsail," Captain Cook yells through the howling winds to his master. The order is passed to the fore, and in no time at all agile young tars are scurrying up the ratlines, now swaying like the pendulum of a grandfather clock, to reduce the area of canvas being filled by the squalls and threatening to knock the ship over. But then, after just 2 days, all returns to as it was before. Clear weather and smooth waters. It is an episode that has piqued the perspicacious captain's inquiring mind. He writes on the last day of February, "Little wind and fine clear weather. The air full as warm as in the same degree of north latitude at the correspondent season of the year. The south-west swells still keep up, notwithstanding the gale hath been over about 30 hours, a proof that there is no land near in that quarter."
This ends CD 6.